So, sure. It's all cold.
Oh, yeah. It's just a plan.
Well, I've been talking about flight we were, with everybody about key. It's like,
Doesn't need to let the call it order.
then you get.
Mayor Ed Honey,
Here.
Mayor Tom Murphy.
Here.
General Ted Maxwell.
Here.
Mayor Joe Winfield,
Here.
Supervisor Rex Scott,
Here.
Chairman Peter Yucapicio,
Here.
Mayor Regina Romero, and Mayor Paul Diaz.
Want to.
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Chair. Yeah, Mr. Chair, members of the council, the slate of officers are in your packet, and the slideshow here requires an action by the board.
Second.
Aye.
All right, well, thank you. Appreciate your service. She would like to take the photo, if that's okay, so there you are. All right, thank you so much. Yes, you are.
All right.
Any comments? As the incoming chair.
My comments will be that I will try to live up to the standard and model that Chairman Yucapicio has set. And I'm sure all of you will hold me accountable.
All right.
The thing I would say is that as someone who was a teacher and a principal for close to 30 years, I do have classroom management skills, so let's not test them. Oh, you think? Call to the audience, Mr. Brown. Go easy on me. We'll then move to item number 5, approval of the December 7, 2023 meeting summary executive session minutes.
So moved.
Any discussions or revisions? Then all in favor of approval, say aye.
Aye.
Tell me any opposed. Consent agenda items for information, program highlights, report contracts, and agreements.
Mr. Chair, members of the council, that is for your information in your packet. If you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer questions. Yes.
Chair. Thank you. Mr. Mogimi, staff has asked if, for the contracts and agreements report, if there could just be a brief description of the contracts.
Of course.
But just a sentence or two, not asking for a lot, but just give some sense of what the contract.
Sure. Be happy to.
Anything else under item number 6? I move then to item number 7, PAG Regional Active Transportation Plan Contract. We have a presentation from Anna Oden.
Yes, Mr. Chair, Hannah's going to give you an update on this contract. Again, the information is in your packet. We're asking for authorization to proceed and enter into a contract to be able to obtain the information that is needed for the long-range plan. So, Hannah, please, if you have anything to add, and we're here to answer any questions you may have.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chair. Hello, members of the council. So this plan does serve to provide an update to the PAG Regional Bicycle Plan, which was approved in 2009, and the PAG Regional Pedestrian Plan, which was approved in 2014. The OWP includes a regional active transportation plan to be completed during fiscal year 2023 to 24 and fiscal year 2024 to 25 under both element 40 transportation activities. The plan will be data-driven and is key to enhancing the RMAP's mobility and accessibility options that will help reduce the region's efforts in reducing carbon emissions and improving air quality. There are key elements that were included in the packet, as well as the full scope, fee schedule, project schedule, and contract was included in your packets as well. Brent Crowther, who is the Senior Associate with Kinley Horn, is attending virtually as well, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Mayor Winfield.
Yeah, could Mr. Crowther just speak to their expertise in this area, their previous experience?
Hello, Mayor Winfield. How are you?
Good.
Yeah, so Kimley Horn and Associates, a national consulting firm with offices in nearly 100 locations across the country. We have a team prepared for this particular contract comprised of staff from our Tucson office, our Mesa office, and then I am supporting from our Salt Lake City office. I spent many years in the Tucson market and moved to Salt Lake City about 3 years ago, where my focus was on active transportation, safety planning, multimodal planning, et cetera. We have a strong team supporting us with equivalent experience. Sub-consultant on this team is Alta Planning and Design. They are also a national firm with specialized expertise in active transportation, bicycle and pedestrian planning.
Thank you, Mr. Crowther.
Task 1. Consultants and Mr. Mogimi, what's the process that you're going to follow to identify and invite members?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, Mr. Chair, members of the council. Typically, we start with our Transportation Planning Committee members. We ask them to either participate or assign an alternate to the task force.
So TPC members can call, and if they can't.
Correct. Of course.
Any other questions for the council members? Thank you. We're authorizing the executive director to execute a contract. Federally required regional long-range transportation plan.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We move on to item number 8, dynamic traffic model contract.
Mr. Chair, members of the council, this item, again, is approval of a contract with a modeling software development organization. And Dr. Hahn can tell you a lot more about the details of what the information used for modeling purposes. But then again, this is in support of all of our planning activities and enhancing our traffic demand modeling process. So we're both here to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions from council members? If not, I'm sorry, General Woodcock.
That's got a good.
Wow.
That's good. The final question on this.
Yes, it is. It is. Sure, and we follow that in the memo as well. So our procurement policy and the state law allows us to consider staying with the same vendor if that vendor has information that nobody else has, proprietary information, and in this case it is. And it would be just impractical to even try to find someone else because all the information they've already developed would not transfer to anybody else. So, but the state law and our procurement policy allows that.
Then I have one. So how's the?
It's negotiated, and yes, it's negotiated, and Dr. Hahn has been working with them to make sure that they are maintaining a very competitive rate.
This is actually just a little different contract, and based on just our development and the base model is based on our just the OWP and the 2021 update. We actually just procured and the software through the vendor, and then just we develop the base year model. Then just that's actually a different because this is the first time ever just that we actually for calibration validation of the model was just supporting this as components. So, but which is probably kind of just a one third price with the usual just offer.
This is from the federal funds and the OWP, which is the carbon reduction program funds that would allow us to enhance our modeling process. Yes, ma'am. Same thing. Correct. Correct.
Not accepted.
I think it was.
It was the May of 2023 meeting. Yes, sir.
Which committee in input on getting these planning documents done. So still lots of questions.
Mayor Romero, when we get to item number 14, there are some comments and questions that I have related to committee responsibilities that I think will be aligned with some of your concerns. Any other comments, questions from council members on this item?
Mr. Chair,
Maxwell,
one more, just Mayor Romero's comment triggered it. So this time we're using carbon reduction plan funds. What did we use the last time we entered a contract for this modeling?
Federal funds as well. But again, as Dr. Hahn mentioned, initially it was the software itself, development of the software. Now this is
Now it's
consulting
actual
services, actually modeling and supporting our team.
Thank you.
Mr. Mogini, in talking with the county team, I wanted to draw your attention to page 104 in our packets.
The program is a federal program originating in the FAST Act. It is a federal transportation performance measure program. ADOT is the main participant in it. MPOs participate by either supporting or adopting their own projections. We've been exercising this program since 2018. And since its inception, we've adopted ADOT's projections. The way that we support them is we track the measures for the PAG region, and we report out in our TIP in our long range plan. On screen are the 5 measures that are on the table. The right-hand column is the specific performance measure. Those are 5-year averages based on annual totals and projections. At the moment, they are using 2 years of real data and then projecting out to, at the time of the adoption, they only had values through 2021. So the values for 22 through 24 were projected. And then those 5 years of data were used to project out for the 5-year average. And those are the measures that the state has adopted and PAG staff is bringing forward for us for PAG to also support and adopt. First topic of discussion is to remember that these are fulfilling FASOC requirements and they're not related to our long range plan. We have a whole package of performance measures, goals, strategies, and performance targets designed to help inform our decision making and our project selection and ultimately the performance of our roadways. We do that through the RMAP performance measures package. This particular item is separate from that. These are forecasts in nature, using historical data to identify the trends of our public roadways. And we'll look into each of the data sets so you can understand the trends. The way to read these 5 graphs are the red bar graphs are the actual data sets that we have. The yellow bar graphs are the forecasted years. The green line is the rolling 5-year average, and you can see the trend is disturbingly increasing at a pretty quick pace. The next graph that I'm going to show you, before I move on, these are again statewide totals. These are not just in our region. The rate of fatalities, which is based on VMT, 100 million miles traveled, we are also seeing the same type of increase. The type of increase displayed shows that we are driving more and we are seeing a higher rate of fatalities on our roadways. Similar measure is tracked for serious injuries. This is the total number. We have historically seen a steady downward trend. In the last decade, we've seen it kind of level out. Serious injuries are ones that would put someone in the hospital for a significant amount of time or have life-altering consequences. And the rates is also determined by VMT. We've seen similar trends to that. Again, kind of a leveling out in recent years, or at least in the projection wise. We've seen a slowing of the rate of decrease. Fifth and final measure is for our vulnerable users. Those include pedestrians, cyclists, emergency response staff, and construction workers that are outside their vehicles. We are seeing a disturbing trend of these also increasing in forecast. And these again are statewide totals. Those 5 measures the state has adopted, and we as a staff recommend the adoption as well. We've taken it through the committees, through Transportation Systems and Safety, Transportation Planning Committee, Management Committee. There's been discussion on it, especially since it's a matter of safety. There is the priority that safety is a concern and an immediate priority for our region to address. This does not step us aside from any of that direction. It is simply to help support ADOT in their initiatives and to fulfill a federal requirement. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'll turn it back over to you for discussion and questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments, Member Murphy?
I was just curious, has ADOT, do you think, ever modeled, because if you see trends going upwards, but our population is also going upwards. So I'd be curious, I don't know if we could even do that, but is it sort of per capita? That would be the correct term, but as you know, population increases, and then if it's a stable incline, you know, that might be something that the other part was on the serious injuries, as cars have gotten safer, as changing lane indicators have gotten better, more airbags, you know, those types. So I just was curious if ADOT has ever layered any of those other comparisons to see if that helps on those trend lines at all.
ADOT, thank you for the question. Yes, ADOT has recently adopted a vulnerable user safety action plan. We are following closely to see what that describes, but it's a report on current conditions and then some strategies to correct the undesirable state. The way that some of the crash data can be viewed is can be done many ways just outside of this performance measure package. For example, we can look at it against population increases. VMT does represent some of that because as the population increase, we see more vehicle miles traveled on the road. So that is where the population is represented. It is not a per capita type of statistic. We do have the ability to run those type of metrics if there's interest. So if you ever have that, you can provide that information. And you are correct. There are many reasons why we see a decline in the serious injuries. Part of it is the vehicles are designed to be safer if you're using devices and stay inside the vehicle and if you obey the speeds. The unfortunate incident that's maybe driving some of the occurrences in the wrong direction could be many. We have lots of information that we are at the ready to provide for you if ever requested.
Thanks. I was just curious.
Thank you. Any others?
I move to approve.
Thank you.
I'll second that.
Thank you very much. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. We're on to item number 10, Transportation Improvement Program Amendment, number 2022.090.
Mr. Chair, members of the council, as indicated, we had a request from ADOT to process this TIP amendment, and Jamie Brown can get into the more specifics on that, but I really want to compliment ADOT staff. They've been working really hard to put together the financial plan for delivering the Keno and Country Club TI project on I-10, and we're going to continue to be responsive and flexible and make adjustments as needed. This is a major project for the region, and we hope that you would support this amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Mohimi, Mr. Chair, members of the Regional Council. Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to introduce this action item. As reflected in the meeting material packet, ADOT has requested a formal TIP amendment to make funding adjustments to two major projects. The funds proposed for adjustment are ADOT funds, known as ASTBG or ASTP in the TIP, that are programmed on ADOT projects in the PAG planning area. The proposed TIP amendment reprograms $3,335,000 of fiscal year 2024 ASTP funding from the I-19 Irvington Road Traffic Interchange project to the I-10 Country Club Road and Keno Interchanges project. As indicated in ADOT's request letter, this programming change ensures that the full FY 2024 PAG region ASTP allocation obligates in the year of apportionment. It also maintains the total amount programmed for the Country Club and Keno TI project. Given that this TIP amendment affects funding in the current fiscal year, ADOT requested that it be considered by the Regional Council at the earliest possible opportunity. Thus, this TIP amendment is following an expedited approval process according to the TIP policies and procedures, and it was recommended for approval at last week's Management Committee meeting. As mentioned previously, these are ADOT funds for programming on ADOT projects. That concludes my introduction. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Regional Council. I'm happy to take questions, and Mr. Rod Lane, ADOT South Central District Engineer, is also here to help address questions.
Move the item.
Second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Carries unanimously. We're on to item number 11, fiscal year 2025-2029. PAG Transportation Improvement Program Development Progress Update and review of any available draft project lists.
Mr. Chair, members of the council, this item again is an ongoing effort, and Jamie can give you an overview of what's been accomplished to date and what we hope to do. As you recall, last year, our regional council authorized extension in our normal TIP development process. So we'd like to provide an update to you today and look forward to coming back to you in the following meetings to hopefully adopt our TIP no later than May of this coming year.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the council. Appreciate the opportunity to provide you with this brief update on the TIP development process, and thank you for that introduction, Mr. Mohini. So one of the things I want to start with is to talk about some of the principles for TIP development. And as we've discussed, going back to March and prior to that, the sunset of the current RTA plan and related funding considerations for RTA Next affect this TIP development cycle. Thus, we've developed these principles for TIP development that we've been sharing with our committees, including the Transportation and Planning Committee, as well as the Management Committee. So I'm going to walk through these briefly. In terms of project cost estimates, estimates for project costs are intended solely for programming purposes. The cutoff date for updating cost estimates was the October 31st TIP subcommittee meeting, making them a static snapshot that cannot be continuously updated. In terms of revenue estimates, similar to cost estimates, revenue estimates are also a one-time snapshot and must remain constant for financial constraint analysis moving forward. Fiscal year 2024 will not be included in the new TIP, so any proposed TIP amendment for the exchange of funds must be addressed separately through the official TIP amendment process. Fiscal year 2025 programming, as long as fiscal year 2025 is reasonably programmed for anticipated construction projects, the fiscal year 25 through 29 TIP document fulfills its intended purpose. Fiscal year 2025 RTA budget ensures that projects ready for construction have supplemental funding for eligible RTA expenses. It is prudent that this flexibility is retained for project delivery. IGAs and/or TIP amendments may be used to make adjustments after the TIP document is adopted. Priority for project starts, projects requiring initiation prior to the July 1st, 2026, will be prioritized to ensure compliance with RTA regulations. These projects are shown in the RTA roadway element worksheet with cells highlighted in green under the project name, and that was included in the packet. And one more slide on this. So update for fiscal years 26 through 29, due to the expiration and or potential renewal of RTA revenues, fiscal years 26 through 29 of the TIP will need to be updated at a later time. Deferred scope change projects. Projects with deferred scope changes rely on RTA Next funding and voter approval. While Pima County's First Avenue Orange Grove Road to Ina Road project may use federal funds, it is still considered a scope change deferred project and requires voter approval before proceeding with the change scope. Hence, the start time prior to July 1st, 2026 is not required. RTA Next contingency. If RTA Next does not pass, the RTA board's fiscal year 2026 budget will be utilized to amend the TIP as needed. So these are principles, again, we've shared with our Transportation Planning Committee as well as the Management Committee. Hopefully understand why this unique situation with the sunset of the current RTA plan affects this TIP development cycle. So in terms of the schedule for the TIP development process, as Mr. Mohini said, looking at the very bottom of this slide, May of 2024 is when we're going to be requesting approval of the FY 25 through 29 TIP. So in terms of where we are now, we're kind of in the middle of that list. At the December 23 through January 2024 preliminary committee review of draft TIP project lists. So we've included project lists in the packet. We are assembling those to put them into one uniform format for the Transportation Planning Committee's review at the next meeting in February. And we'll bring that list forward as well to the Management Committee and Regional Council in March. We'd also like to share the draft project list and information about the TIP with the public in March through the open house process. We'll be finalizing the full draft document in April and commencing a 30-day public comment period. And in May, we will bring forward the final draft TIP to the Management Committee and the regional council, and we will convene a public hearing at that time. And finally, in terms of draft project list, just to give you a better sense of what I mean, you can see on the right screen captures of the various project lists. They look different because they are different. They're come in different formats from different committees. And again, we will assemble those into one unified list for review in the coming months. And with that, Mr. Chair, members of the Regional Council, appreciate your time. Happy to take questions.
Questions for Mr. Brown? Mayor Murphy?
One of the backup materials was a pie chart that talked about the different percentages. Is that up to date, up through the 18 years that we've been in this process, or towards completion, or just as I saw, well, I had heard one of the council members in the city on the radio the other day talking about, fair share, and I noticed that it was 73%, which has gone to the city. But I was trying to figure out, is that yet to date or through the potential of the next RTA?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Murphy, members of the Regional Council. That pie chart does reflect funding from 2007 all the way through the projection of 2029 through the draft programming process. I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Tao to add to that. He's the one who created this pie chart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The expenditures are.
Pardon me, can you hold the microphone closer to your mouth?
Sorry.
Even closer.
Gotta be right. Yeah. The expenditures are through December 20th, 2023, that check run period. So yes, they are current.
Thank
you. So can I ask? Yes. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Not at all.
Bob, so that's not exactly what Jamie said. So the chart itself, so this pie chart, that's only showing the expenditures thus far, or is this also including the forecasts all the way through 2020?
This includes the expenditures are up to date, but it also includes the information that was agreed upon at TIP subcommittee on December 20th. So yes, it's two pieces.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments from council members? All right, that was an information item. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
We're going to move on to item number 12, Regional Mobility and Accessibility Plan Development Update. Mr. McGinnis.
Okay, members of the council, again, this item, we hope to bring it to you on a regular basis just to keep you informed of the development of the long-range plan, and Jeanette Duran will give you an update.
Mr. Chair, members of the Regional Council, hi, Jeanette Duran, Transportation Planning Director here at PAG. If you can't hear me, I'll put the microphone closer, but I am pretty loud, so my 13-year-old would agree. Once again, 2055 Regional Mobility and Accessibility Plan. This is our long-range plan, 30-year planning horizon, updated every 4 years. We come before this group and say that again, but we are going to continue to bring regular updates to this group and offer an opportunity for questions. Right now, we're working through many of the required components of the plan. Of course, always looking at the fiscal constraint and looking at our revenues and expenditures and the costs of completing projects. So right now we're looking at about $16.2 billion for the fiscally constrained project list. So we're working with the committees to take all of the projects, which are not fiscally constrained at the moment, and working to get that list down to $16.2 billion to meet that reasonable expectation of funding and projects for the community. We'll continue to be refining that project list. We've been working with the RMAP subcommittee. It's a working group that is, it started with our TPC, and our TPC members have generously offered their staff to come and participate on that committee as well. They've been very, very helpful to the process, and we really appreciate everybody's contributions. We have held discussions with that working group in November, and then most recently on January 16th. We also plan on having another meeting of that group next month, probably around the same time as the TPC meeting. Our current discussions have been focusing around evaluating our performance measures and providing guidance on the targets and discussing that project list. like I said, the list is not quite fiscally constrained, so we're going to be bringing data and information to that working group and to the TPC to help make some of those decisions. And we will, of course, be bringing all of our information through the TPC and then to subsequent committees as we move forward. Staff has provided some recommendations to the working group to recategorize programs and to reflect the priorities of the region. And we want to make sure that the project list is realistic and reflects the goals and initiatives of all of our agencies. Once the RTA project list is adopted by the RTA board, that information will be incorporated into the long range plan as well. Like I said, the next step will be to continue to align the project list with the fiscal constraint and move that into the modeling phases of the project. So that's what Hansu and his team will be doing. We're going to continue to update our performance data and make sure that that is accessible and up to date so that as we move forward with project selection, all that information is current and accessible to everybody. All recommendations from that working group, of course, will go to TPC and we'll continue to work with them, as well as our other committees such as PopTech as we move forward through the modeling. We have presented some of our base year data to TPC or to that working group, our MAP working group. That will be the foundation of our land use model and of course our activity-based model. And that way they've been introduced to the demographics and land use patterns and will help go into some of that decision making. As always, we're going to continue to coordinate with the RTA Next effort and with Rick and his team as we move forward with those decisions and making sure that the RMAP does fold in some of the project list, of course, and then some of the initiatives that are coming through RTA Next. As always, once again, I do really appreciate all the work and responsiveness and contributions of the jurisdictions and your staff. It's been very, very helpful coming to our meetings and being productive and contributing to our efforts. So with that, that's all I have. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Questions? All right, as with the previous item, that was an information item. And so is the next one, item number 13, regional transportation revenues update.
Mr. Chair, members of the council. So I hope you see a pattern here. So these are all essentially pieces of the puzzle that ultimately builds up our long range. So obviously monitoring our revenue, both actuals and projections, they all finally are developed into our long range plan. So everything we've talked about so far feeds into the long range plan. So again, this for information. The information is in your packet. And Mr. Tao, if you'd like to add anything to that, please do.
Thank you, Mr. Mogimi. I'm presenting now the revenues update.
Revenues.
Yes, sorry.
Show me the money. Money.
So, Mr. Chair, members of the Regional Council, thanks for having me. If you'll turn to the revenues report in your meeting packet, I'll go ahead and begin with Table 3 and Figure 1. Through October, there was 59.5 million in HERF and VLT collected across the region. Of that 59.5 million, PAG collected about 12.4 million, or about 21% of that regional funding. The remainder was distributed directly to our jurisdictional partners. Regional HERF revenues were almost 5% increase year over year. Over the 5-year average, we stand at about 9%. Table 4 shows HERF 12.6 in detail. So far, we have collected $10.1 million, which is 15.3% more than the ADOT official forecast and about 9.4% stronger than last year. Table 5 shows HERF 2.6 with stronger than expected collections totaling $2.2 million year to date, which is 13% stronger than last year. And with Table 6, currently PAG has just over $79.6 million in an interest-bearing account. Most of these dollars are spoken for. In Table 7, we look at the city and town HERF distributions year to date. Table 8 shows the HERF 12.6 and 2.6 we've already seen. Additionally, we have Pima County HERF and Pima County vehicle license tax, the portion set aside for transportation use only. And Table 9 has the previous 5 years and lets you see how much HERF your city or town received. Table 10 shows us gallons of gas sold in Pima County through various fiscal years. We normally like to see about 13%, and we are currently just under 13% for the current fiscal year. And in table 11, about 50.6 million has been collected in TPT this year, trending for more than 5% gain over the adopted budget. That also mimics the percent rise over last year's actuals, also over 5%. Mr. Chair, that concludes my update. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions?
If I could add, please, I may add, Mr. Chair, members of the council. So the HERF collection obviously is important. We're monitoring that closely. There were predictions that it's going to flatten out and start going back down. So just want to give you a kind of a heads up on that discussion that's ongoing at the state level. The projections may end up being less optimistic moving forward for various reasons. We just want to make sure that that might be a topic of discussion at a later time. We kind of look at PERF projection over the next 20 years.
Mr. Chair, has there been any conversations early on in the legislative session about sweeping again or clawing any of that money? I know.
Thank you. I wasn't going to go there, but unfortunately, we're watching it carefully. Unfortunately, because of the deficit, if you recall, that was one of the tools for the state to balance their deficit. So I don't know for sure, but you hit it right on. That may be an issue.
Mr. Chair, Mayor Murphy, just to kind of expand that, at the state transportation board level, we're not aware of any discussions yet of going back after the HERF. The last HERF sweeps, I think the uproar was pretty loud and clear from all the municipalities in the state. And so I won't tell you that they won't. What we are hearing though, is there were a lot of in the member delegated funds that they were able to give out as part of the last budget negotiation. A lot of those funds were provided to municipalities. Some of those funds have already been put in the municipalities' bank account. So if they've got those, they may be safe, but not all of them have. The speaker has spoken quite heavily, Speaker of the House, quite heavily about those funds being pulled back. So that is probably the bigger concern right now in transportation infrastructure. What I can tell you is with the $95 million grant that we got just from under the IIJA or the bill, the bipartisan infrastructure law. In the last couple of days for I-10, we've been guaranteed by the legislature that they will not go after either one of the buckets of I-10 money they approve. And at the last transportation board, we actually approved the project funding and awarded the contract for taking the Gila River Bridge to 3 lanes. So that's moving forward. But I do think it's an important concept that we have to keep our eyes on the HERF money, because that is shown as an easy fix before when we've gone through tough times economically in the state. So I appreciate the question.
And I just follow because I know even at a local level, the quicker you can design it, award it, whatever it might be, the less opportunity there is to be clawed back. So anything we can do collectively, I think that's a good thing to make sure it's allocated.
Gentleman, Mayor Honey.
As part of that discussion, the last I heard, even I think the governor was talking about it, is if they have to cover the shortfall, they were going to do it equally between all state departments. So if they do something like that, it'd be a lesser hit for ADOT. You know, I mean, you might take a hit, but it might not be trying to balance the whole budget. There's still optimism.
Other questions or comments from the council members? Thank you. We're going to move on to another information item, item number 14, carbon reduction strategies update.
Chair, members of the council, Dustin's going to give you a update on the status of our initiatives, and we put it in a timeline format, so hopefully it's more informative. The information is already in your packet in a memo format, but we felt that the timeline might be a little bit more helpful to provide what has been done to date and what needs to be done moving forward. Dustin.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the council. I'm Dustin Fitzpatrick, the Air Quality Manager. providing you update on the summary of the carbon reduction strategies timeline.
Could you just hold the microphone just a little?
Oh, sure, yeah. So your packet contains the memos provided previously on this topic. So I'll step through the strategies. Back in April, ADOT and PAG consulted on the carbon reduction strategies for development into the draft OWP. PAG had requested member comments at that time, and the regional council adopted the OWP with those carbon reduction strategies after the comment period in May. Last October, ADOT released the draft of their carbon reduction strategies and requested comments. We submitted our comments and requested comments from PAG members. In November, ADOT finalized the statewide carbon reduction strategy and incorporated PAG's comments. So we continue to move forward with the projects identified in the OWP, such as the Regional Active Transportation Plan and dynamic traffic assignment model that were approved today. Okay, moving on. This is a timeline of the greenhouse gas performance measure. This was a new rule issued by FHWA last December. This establishes declining targets for CO2 emissions on the national highway system. February 1st is the deadline for ADOT to submit their 4-year target to FHWA. I attended a presentation last week by ADOT staff proposing a negative 0.1% reduction target initially, and that was based on the trending historic population for the state growth and the gasoline and diesel usage. So next, March through June, this will be sent to committees to review PAG's greenhouse gas performance measure target. They'll go through TPC, EPAC, and management committees to conduct a technical review of the target, along with the metric calculation methods that are available for MPOs, and make a recommendation then to this body. By the end of July, Regional Council will need to approve that metric calculation method and the 4-year target for submittal to ADOT. Then in February 2026, we'll submit our second 4-year target to ADOT. This rule was introduced mid-performance period. So really this initial one is a 2-year target. The baseline year is 2022. That concludes my update. Happy to take questions.
Can I just ask, can you go back to the last slide that had the blue on the bottom?
Sure.
First of all, I can't believe it was already back in May of 2023 when we approved it. It felt like yesterday, but the one before that, April, May, when it said PAG requested member comments, is that the public at large and the municipalities? And if so, did we get a lot of comments back or from any of the municipalities?
As I recall, we had one comment. Mr. McGimmy can speak to that.
I'll be happy to. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the council. So as part of every meeting, obviously the public has an opportunity to submit comments on anything that we have on the agenda. In addition to that, we did have a request to all the management committee representatives to provide comments. And ultimately, regional council approval in May. Again, that's an agenda item that the public has an opportunity to provide comments. So multiple meetings on the agenda discussed, and the formal comment was only one entity that provided a formal comment in writing, but it was discussed at multiple different committees. Thanks.
Mayor Romero.
So according to the Transportation Planning Committee, and we've heard from both in the county and the city of Tucson representatives, the Transportation Planning Committee was asked to give input on the overall work program. Both Pima County and the City of Tucson representatives have asked to be able to participate in helping give input and information about the carbon reduction strategies to better have results versus just planning. And they have not been given an opportunity to have a discussion about the carbon reductions program. What we had in May of 2023 as a PAG board was a budget. And so we approved the budget for $11 million that are coming from the bipartisan infrastructure law. We, this board, PAG, has not been given the opportunity to discuss what are the strategies that we get the best bang for the buck. And so I have been saying since May of 2023 that we, the PAG board and our committees, deserve an opportunity to give input on how we spend this money. According to your budget, all of these funds are going to planning. None of it, as I see, all of it is planned. And so it is very unfortunate, and I will keep saying how unfortunate. And really, to be honest, there's a lack of transparency in terms of how we, this board, and our committees and public participate in making decisions of federal funds that we don't get all the time into putting them to work in reducing carbon and greenhouse gases in our region. So, Mr. Mogimi, you keep saying that the PAG board approved this in May of 2023. We approved a budget, sir. We did not give any input, or our transportation planning committee and our representatives were not given an opportunity to have a discussion, even though some of these jurisdictions asked plenty of times for an opportunity to give input on how to spend federal funds that could make a big difference, not just invest these funds in planning efforts. So still not satisfied, and approving a budget is very different than approving a strategy. We all have to approve our budgets, but all of our budgets have a number, and then our city managers explain to us how that money is going to be used, and we are not being offered that opportunity here.
Any other questions or comments from council members? I wanted to direct everybody's attention to page 143 in your packets, where it says the bulleted item that says committee process, and the bulleted item right below it that says regional council. There's 4 different committees that are cited: Air Quality Subcommittee, TPC, EPAC, Management Committee. And it says they will review planning efforts and recommendations for carbon reduction integration and review of initial greenhouse gas performance measure 4-year reduction target. And then our role is to review those recommendations and approve the greenhouse gas reduction target. But I think we would be very reliant on the input that we're getting from these committees. For me, one sentence that explains the work of 4 committees, the pending work of 4 committees, especially with that July deadline that's mentioned in the timeline, is not sufficient. I'd like to request, by way of direction, a memorandum to the council breaking down the roles and responsibilities of each one of those 4 committees and how they will advise the council so that we can then make our recommendations and approvals.
Mr. Chair, and I would just add, as a transparency, it's good that comes to us as a memo, but let's just put it on the next meeting and go over.
Well, we could, Mayor Murphy, thank you very much. If you recall, I requested a standing agenda item, and so I'm sure this item will be back, and that memorandum can be. I mean, we can get it before that item, but I think we should review it as the item for your suggestion.
Mr. Chair,
Mayor Romero.
let me ask for clarification. You're making a motion right now?
No, I was doing it just by
giving
way,
direction?
just by way of direction, because we already have on page 143, this sentence that says these 4 committees will review planning efforts and recommendations. I'm asking for more detail as to the work of each one of those committees.
Well, in detail, but also, you know, the meetings where they are actually being asked to give the input, right? I mean, detail of what the committee is responsible for is not the same as being able to have that committee give direction and input in terms of how these funds are going to be used. It seems to me like most of the decisions of how we're, I mean, $1 million in household travel survey, we have a budget here, but we approved the budget, but we haven't been given the opportunity, not the PAG board, not the committees. And so if we can go further in terms of, yes, the explanation of the work, but where are the meetings and their recommendations for PAG to be able to consider their recommendations as we move forward in funding these projects. So if we could also include that in the memo.
And I had asked for a breakdown of roles and responsibilities for each one of the 4 committees. You're asking also for a meeting schedule, and are you also asking for perhaps draft agendas? Because these are, to your point, technical advisory bodies. I mean, they are referred in that way earlier in our packet. So I just think as much, to Mayor Romero's point, I think as much detail as possible as to the pending work of those committees, what they're each going to be dealing with. If there are already draft agendas, I think as much detail as possible is what we're asking.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
It is. It's fair to say, as well as, I mean, we have a July 30th, 2024 deadline. Is of the essence. And what I would like to see is, like, are they meeting, and are these committees being asked to give input on how we spend these funds? Because according to our appointee, or our representative for the city of Tucson, the Transportation Planning Committee has not been asked, even though members of that committee have requested to have this agenda item, they have not been allowed to discuss. And so, yes, absolutely, as much information as possible, but we also have to see the tangible action in terms of what our jurisdictions, and I'm not just speaking for the city of Tucson, I'm also speaking for Marana and Sahuarita and South Tucson regarding our jurisdiction's input and how to use these funds. And so, yes, and then some. But I appreciate your direction.
Thank you, Mayor Romero. And I think as much detail as possible in the memorandum that was requested, and then to the points made by both Mayor Romero and Mayor Murphy, I think any follow-up that we can get at the March meeting when this standing agenda item comes up again is of course appreciated.
Sure, of course, we're happy to.
General Max.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One thing I'd like to add so everybody understands that ADOT submits what the anticipated 4-year target to be is not official yet. It should be released in the coming weeks, but it is the minus 0.01 is really what I'd call a reasonable goal to be set, and a reasonable target. And it's something I think we will be able to achieve. I guess I would, again, I don't mind memorandums. I prefer briefings just because I think that gets it in the public's perspective a little easier. It's a little.
I think you're gonna get both.
And that's good. But the other thing I would say is too, we have this conversation every board meeting. It always comes up, and that's why it's a standing issue. But it always ends up being the same thing, and we haven't gotten to the point where we're all either comfortable or we've had a conversation where we've all put it on record if we're comfortable with where we're going. I think that might solve the issue coming up every board meeting. So what I would ask also is in the next update, please let us know what I think it's 11.7 million we've been authorized PAG out of the carbon reduction plan funds that came to ADOT. It's just where we sit with those funds, what we've got them already approved and, going towards, and then what the remaining value we've still got remaining to authorize. And when you brief us on that also, can you also brief us on what's already committed? Just so everybody knows, because this is an issue. It's important. I think it's important that all the municipalities have input into it. But I still think we're all just trying to grasp what does it really mean. And I'll tell you, this is the state's plan or strike. It's not a plan. I was made very clear when I talked to them this week. They don't have a plan. It's a strategy. I actually talked with the executive director about the difference in terminology, and terms aren't important until they are, but they are required to submit a strategy. At that point, that's kind of where the requirements stop. They've worked with all the different MPOs and other entities to kind of identify what they're going to put forward and what they're going to do, and then it is up to all of us and working with the executive director and the entire team to where we go. But I just think it'd be great to get as much information in front of us, have maybe a little bit more in-depth conversation, and then not put it to bed. I think the updates are important, but we need to get it to the point where it's not a source of controversy and discussion on this board.
Absolutely agree with you, Mr. Maxwell. The state ADOT put together a strategy and expects MPOs to make our own. They expect for MPOs to make our own decisions. What I'm asking for is yes information, but I'm asking for the opportunity for our jurisdictions to be able to give input, and that has not happened. This board has approved a budget. We're receiving the 11 million. We know that we want it, yes, but the opportunity to give the input on how to create our own regional action plan on using this money has not been given. As a matter of fact, some of these funds have been decided by staff at PAC. And so I just do not believe that this PAC board and our representatives at the committees, whatever committees are responsible to give input on this, I do not see it as transparent in terms of how to spend these funds. There are certain goals that the bipartisan infrastructure law wants MPOs to reach with this money. And we have not been given the opportunity to speak about them and to decide how the money is going to be used. Every mayor and council in this region has that opportunity, and it's given by our city managers. I do not understand how this particular organization and its executive director is not giving us, PAG, and the committees that should be making this decision, the opportunity to do it. And that's what I'm asking.
Just a point of clarification for the executive director. All the things that we've been working on, is it not finding the data, gathering the information, for then it comes back to us, to the mayor's point, then we put together the strategy, but we have to have the knowledge where we are or where we're not before we can get to the ultimate plan or strategy to get to the end result. Is that kind of not where we are at this point?
Mr. Chair, Mayor Murphy, and I appreciate Darrell Maxwell clarifying the difference. So if he's on the slides, we continue to reference to everything as strategies, because the plan itself will be developed over the next 2 years. So the plan doesn't exist yet, but all these pieces come together to help us develop the plan. So up to this point, everything we've done is, as you described, to collect the data, make sure we have the tools and resources to put them all together. to be able to build that foundation for the plan itself. And when I reference to the plan, ultimately, everything we do, and I said that before under a couple of different discussions, everything we do ultimately by federal law is required to be essentially compiled into the long-range plan. The long-range plan, even for this purpose, must include not only the target, but also those elements that would help us achieve that target. So all of this is yet to come over the next multiple years, but obviously immediately the overall work program focuses on the 2 years. And the overall work program authorized those steps to be taken.
And things like the software and other things we've approved are the tools that it will help get us to where we can come up with a solid, strong plan.
Exactly, and those are all outlined in the OWP.
Mr. Chair, thank you. And that's why I made the point of first, I'd like to see how much money, because you're right, OWP is a 2-year plan. That's where we've got everything. We, as a board back in May, approved that. But what I'm curious about is how much of the 11 million is that taking? I know there's numbers there, but I'd like to see, because once we have the data, if we've spent all the money gathering the data, on the flip side, we're not making any real, improvement. So I think it's important that we have data. Data-based decision-making is the best way to go about it. But I just want to make sure that there is an outcome to do what the IIJA's plan and the carbon reduction plan. Now, for the record, the state doesn't have a carbon reduction plan. It's just got a strategy. If I am correct, the only area that does have an actual carbon reduction plan in place right now is Maricopa, because they've been in a non-attainment region for years. So they're taking this money and they're starting to use it to execute their plan. So as all good things, you don't want to plan to death. You've got to get execute at some point. They're already there. I think what we're debating around this table is, when do we stop planning? When do we start executing? So that's why I'd appreciate a thorough briefing update of both the plan, how long it's going to take if we're building it, how much money's going to it, and how much money are we going to have remaining to execute. And then that's when I love committees. Inputs are good, but ultimately remember the responsibility for it does fall at this table. We can delegate authority. We just can't delegate a responsibility. It still falls to us.
Mr. Chair, if I may add, so thank you for that. Again, that's why we put it on the timeline, to recognize that there was 2 critical milestones. One of them was November of 23. That's when the state was required to submit the strategies, which we have done that. The next milestone for the state is next month, and then for us is in July. So we're trying to hit those targets to make sure that we comply with the new law. So again, I appreciate the discussion. More information is always helpful, but keep in mind, this is a brand new law. We're trying to comply with the law, as well as to make sure that we integrate it into our planning process. So it's not just a one and done thing. It's going to be an ongoing effort.
Absolutely, 100% agree that what this board should be discussing is, how do we implement our strategy, right? How do we put this money to work so that we can see greenhouse gas reduction and carbon reduction in this region? According to what we have in front of us, and we can share, and the public, as there's a budget that in 2024 spends $1 million on household travel service. This is in 2024. In 2025, the same household travel reduction service will cost us another $606,000. That's $1.6 million just in the same studies. And this board should be given the opportunity to decide how we budget. My fear is that there's been so much budgeted already that there's not going to be enough to be able to implement, so that we can use this money in a way that will help us curb greenhouse gases and reduce carbon. And so that is the reason why I keep harping back to it, and that's why I'm pretty sure Chair Scott is putting this on the budget so that we have the opportunity. And by the way, our committees are technical experts, correct? Technical experts should be giving us their input as to how we use these funds so that we can do more for carbon reduction. My fear is that way too much money has been budgeted already by PAG staff for the funds to do what they were intended to do by the federal government.
Sure. Just one last point on that, but we're the ones that approve the budget, and staff is, I mean, I don't want the public to think that staff is, we approved ice cream and we're buying brownies. You know, we approved a budget to do the staff working on anything that we haven't approved in the May 2023 budget.
I'm sorry, is that a question? That's a question?
Yes.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, Mayor Murphy. No, absolutely not. We are complying with the overall work program. That's why it's detailed. That's why it's budgeted. There are line items. So we are following the direction of the council.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, I am so sorry, but I need the floor.
Please.
Mr. Mogimi, you keep saying that you are doing everything with this board's input. That is absolutely not true. We approved an $11 million budget in May of 2023, and we have not been given the opportunity to decide how this $11 million is going to be budgeted. So you could approve an $11 million line item in your budget, but you want to know how Parks and Recreation is going to spend that $11 million. And as an elected official, you want to be afforded the opportunity to decide how and where those $11 million are going into Parks and Rec, and be able to give your council colleagues the opportunity to decide. Maybe it's a recreation center, maybe it's more greenery for your parks, maybe you want a new dog park, but you want to be able to give input on how those $11 million are going to be spent with Parks and Rec. So I still have the floor. So no, we are not being given the opportunity to decide how to spend this money. As a matter of fact, we are being given a budget that is full of millions of dollars of planning. So I want the opportunity for the residents of the city of Tucson and for the benefit of the residents of this region to know and be able to have a say as to how we spend that 11 million. That's all I'm asking.
Mr. Chair, and I think previous to this afternoon, we approved certain contracts that some of us voted for and some of us didn't. And that's my analogy of we approved the landscaping as opposed to building a football field, as opposed to building a softball field. That's what we voted on earlier today. And I'm assuming more of those contracts will be coming to us to discuss. Some of us might agree with the expenditures and some wouldn't, but I just don't want it out there thinking staff's approving contracts that don't come to us. May not agree, but with it, but they are coming to us.
Tony, were you trying to get my attention?
I'm ready to move on. I think we're becoming redundant.
Just wanted to ask one other thing. It says also on page 143 that public input will be considered during the development of each plan, and ultimately the RMAP is required to incorporate the adopted carbon reduction strategies. We've asked for information on the roles and responsibilities of each one of the 4 committees, as much detail as you can get into what each of them will be determining. General Maxwell mentioned how each one of them is involved with that $11 million. Can we also get some input into how public input is going to be considered throughout this process, including during the meeting of those committees?
Of course, be happy to add that as well. And just for everybody's benefit, every document that we have goes through a public process and public has an opportunity to comment. So just want to make sure you know that, but we can add additional details under each item.
Got it. All right. Thank you all very much. And I believe we have now reached the point of adjournment.
In the words of Ed Honey.
Good job on your first meeting.
Well, thank you.
Anybody need
Access over to you, Ted?
No, I've got one.
Oh,
Okay,
all right.
Anybody need a break?
Like, well, it's the next year. He said, sure. So
Well, he's not the chair.
I will make sure I get you out of here. No,
Let's take about 5 or 10.
earlier.
Really missing.
Everybody's here.
Rex is over there though, yeah.
I should just. Yep. I cried.
All right, folks, we'll call the RT meeting to order. And the first item on the agenda is election of officers. General Maxwell for chair and Mayor Winfield for first vice chair and Mayor Murphy for second vice chair. Do we have a motion? Motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
That took no time.
What do we? Will it float?
Thank you. Make a banana split and.
That's for banana split there.
I like banana color better than. I've already asked if I have the ability to make a motion to make Mayor Honey the chair for another year, but I was told I couldn't do that. First up, Ed, I just want to say thank you for all the leadership and insight and the conversations that you've given the board for a year. I know there's nobody that's more passionate about the role of the PAG and RTA. I think you've probably got the largest core knowledge around this table of any of us with how the RTA came about. We've been on opposite ends of some RTA bills up at the legislature and some other things, but I've always known that your heart and your desires are all in the right place. And we know that ultimately, if we need to get, find out where all the skeletons are, you'll be able to get them for us. But I did want to give you an opportunity if you had any final thoughts, other than the fact that you were extremely happy to turn the show over.
No, I mean, I'm extremely happy to give the chairmanship away, but you know, it's an honor to serve here and been doing this a long time. And it's a tedious, tough project, and a lot of people put their heart and soul in it, not just me. And it was an honor to be the chairman this last year. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I'm going to take just a couple of minutes just to lay out a couple of things. This next year is critical. It just flat out is. And I think all of you know my position on regional transportation funding. It is the key to transportation funding and infrastructure funding in this state for sure, based on our budget. And we aren't going to see something like the IIJA or the bill come around every couple of years. Heck, a lot of times they don't even reauthorize the bill that they had, proposed previously. They just kick the can or add a year to it. So we've got to take care of ours. And I will tell you, the regional funding, we talked earlier about the revenues. It was a great brief, but you've got to remember, if you look at the slide on how much of the funding comes from the state, the feds, and those HERF funds, it's about like that compared to about that from the RTA. The RTA is what drives our regional transportation. And I want us all to be laser focused for the next year on getting a plan in a timely manner so that we can get it to the citizens so they've got time to give us more input before we get a final plan that we send to the board to get on the ballot. This board has voted and approved and said, we are going to the ballot and we intend to go to the ballot in the spring of 25. We are up against the clock. So we will continue to do all the roles and responsibilities and the duties that the Transportation Authority has to do. But there's going to be a lot of time we're going to have some tough, frank, open conversations. Every municipality has their priorities, has the desire of what they need. Unincorporated Pima County knows their needs and their desires. But what we've got to remember is it's all part of a system. It's all a part of an economic system. It's all part of a transportation system. And it's no different than when the state board sits and we talk about approving funds for projects that are in Kingman or in, on the reservation or in Cochise County. It's still part of the big system. It'd be very easy to get caught up and say, oh yeah, well, this is what we need in Maricopa. This is what we need in Pima. But you know what? That responsibility falls a lot on us. If it wasn't for the regional funding, there would be $0 to put towards rural infrastructure. And the one thing that the Transportation Board has shown me is that when you drive over the rural infrastructure, you realize how much help they need. And there's no help there. And if Prop 476 in Maricopa doesn't get through, they will have immediate challenges in Maricopa, but I'll tell you, it will hurt rural funding. And if we can't support our own regional funding, the money at the state legislature that they have available is not going to come here. It's not going to go to the rurals. We know where it's going to be spent. And 4.5 million of the 7.5 million population resides in Maricopa County. So it's really important for us to focus on this going forward. I'll stop my rant at this point, but I do look forward to this. I think as much as I know, and I've had several of the mayors come up to me and say good luck. As much as I know it's going to be a tough churn going forward, think of all the time committed from everybody, from the CAC to the TMC to the citizens to the meetings. There's a lot of passion out there and they expect us to get it done. And I'd made a comment earlier that we can delegate some of the authority on issues and we can ask for committee inputs, but ultimately the responsibility is right here. So I appreciate working with each and every one of you. And with that note, let's move on to call to the audience. Jamie, do we have anybody?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. We do have one speaker with us in the audience today, so I will introduce this item and the speaker. For this item, speakers are limited to a 3-minute oral presentation and may submit written comments of any length for the board's files. Call to the audience is limited to 30 minutes. Individual board members may respond to criticism made by those individuals who have addressed the board. However, the board will not discuss or take action on a matter raised during a call to the audience that is not already on the agenda. So we have with us today Brad Anderson. Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Please start your comment by stating your name for the record. After that, you will have 3 minutes to address the RTA board. At the 2-minute mark, I will politely cut in and request that you wrap up your comments. You may now proceed with your comment.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you all hear me fine? Okay, good. I will hold this up close. So first off, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, thank you for the opportunity. When someone says, Mr. Anderson, I want to assure everyone here that we are not in the newest filming of The Matrix. So you don't need to worry about that. But I am Brad Anderson. I am the president and CEO of the Greater Vale Area Chamber of Commerce. You know, it's been just a couple of months ago that we were hoping that we would have a representative from our community sitting at your table. And the voters decided within the community that that was not to be. But I also go back thinking that a lot of people have told us, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. Well, I'm here to try to keep us off the menu, but on the list, if you will. So, you know, the Vale community is a big and rapidly growing community. And I want to emphasize the need for the expansion of Colossal Cave Road as a specific project that's in the community. The increasing population in the region, coupled with the challenges posed by 2 very busy railroad tracks, underscores the urgency of investing in transportation infrastructure to support the growing community. The adage of if you'll build it, they will come, the movie from Field of Dreams, well, that's a little antiquated in the Vale community because they've already come and they're going to continue to come. In the last 20 years, the Vale census designated place grew by over 500%. To compound the problem, we're experiencing only the beginning of growth. For example, Rocking K Development has just begun to build homes, and there are industrial developments such as the new H2K project that's on the horizon. Now, the surge in residents is inevitably led to increased traffic congestion, putting a strain on existing roadways like Colossal Cave Road. This road, being a key artery in the area, is now facing congestion issues and safety and demand immediate attention. The presence of 2 railroad tracks further complicates the issue. If you've been through the area, you know, and if the trains are coming through, backup can be all the way from Colossal Cave Road past I-10. It gives problems for both students, commuters, public safety, because we're unable to access the rest of the community. Economic impact is huge in that area too. We want growth in retail, restaurants, and so forth, but it's difficult to have when you don't have good transportation, as you all know. it's worth noting, and I know this is significant, that public support for the expansion of Colossal Cave Road and the improvement of roadways in southeast Pima County is very much supported by the entire community. We saw Vail School District, Rincon Valley Fire Department have written letters of
Carol, we're
support.
at 3 minutes.
The vast majority of community members recognize the benefits of these projects and are eager to see positive changes that will enhance their daily lives. In conclusion, from the Greater Vail Area Chamber of Commerce, we ask for your support of the expansion of Colossal Cave Road, that we keep it on the CAC's recommended list, and that we proceed in that endeavor. Thank you for your time.
We have no more speakers at this time.
Sure, thank you. Just wanted to say that Board of Supervisors met 2 days ago, and there was a motion made by one of my colleagues to make a position of the county that Colossal Cave Road project be removed from list, and that the funds for that project be devoted to pavement preservation. We received not only objections to that from the Vail Chamber of Commerce, but also from the Vail School District and the Rincon Valley Fire District. And that motion was defeated by a vote of 4-1.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, at this time we'll move on to item 4, approval of December 7th, 2023 mint summary.
So
Do
moved.
I have a motion? Okay. Wait, we have a motion by Mayor Winfield and a second by Chairman Yuka PCO. Is there any discussion or corrections? All right, not hearing any comments. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Let's move on to item 5, the consent agenda and consent items for information. Executive Director?
Sure, Mr. Chair, members of the board, as we discussed previously, under the PAG agenda, this is for information only. We're just happy to answer any questions you may have, and we will add additional descriptions in the future packets. So hopefully that's more helpful to you.
There's no
Got a motion by-
There's no motion needed.
No action required.
It's true, sorry about that. I always believe there should always be action, but that's a different story. All right, so there's no action. So do we have any further discussion? Any questions for the Executive Director on this issue? All right, let's move on to item number 6. 2024 RTA Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan. Mr. McLaughlin, you'd like to provide us the briefing?
Is everyone able to hear me okay, or should I hold this closer?
It's better to hold up. Now that I'm not down on the kiddie table down there, you can understand either how deaf I am or how hard it is to hear across it without that.
It's not a problem. Yeah, okay. So yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the RTA board. Today I'll be discussing the RTA's updated Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan, or PTASP, for 2024. This is required by the Federal Transit Administration, FTA, for all transit agencies that receive FTA 5307 urbanized area formula grants. The FTA requires this plan be reviewed and approved on an annual basis by both the Transit Safety Committee, or the TSC, which is made up of equal parts managerial and frontline working staff who operate the Sun Shuttle services, and the RTA board. This year's plan was reviewed and approved by the Transit Safety Committee on December 20th, 2023. And minor changes were made from the previous year's plan that was adopted by the RTA board on March 23rd, 2023. And so the approval of this PTASP from both the Transit Safety Committee and the RTA board will affirm that this plan complies with FTA regulations and will effectively guide transit operators to follow safety policies and procedures set in place by the federal government. And then once approved by the RTA board, the plan will then be submitted to ADOT for final review and certification. And with that, I would like to request the RTA board approve the RTA's Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan for 2024. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the briefing. First off, anybody have any questions for Mr. McLaughlin? Okay, in that case, do I hear a motion to approve the 2024 RTA Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan?
Second.
I have a Motion from Mayor Honey, a second from Supervisor Scott. Any further discussion? All right, hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Abstentions? The board approves the 2024 RTA Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan. So thank you very much. Well, we're making record time.
Got our 2 years.
I already told him I was worried about how fast he was flying.
I moved good.
So at this time, let's go on, let's move to item 7, the RTA Next Plan Development Update. Mr. Mogimi, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Again, as Mr. Maxwell mentioned earlier, this is obviously has been our highest priority since your last meeting. We've focused our efforts in coordinating with the TMC as directed by the board. We had requested additional information from the TMC. That additional information was provided to the TMC at the January 4th meeting, and then again at the January 17th meeting. They had combined between the two meetings, roughly almost 10 hours of discussion. And what you have in your packet is the product of the January 17th discussion and final recommendation. We kept the CAC's recommendations as a comparison. I want to thank the county for this format. Actually, they came back with this format, so we kept the same format. Basically, you have the 4.2 option that was approved by the CAC. You have 5.1 option that was approved by the CAC as well. And then you have the TMC's modification in the last column. We printed out a large print for you, obviously for today's discussion. We want to make sure it's legible and we can see that information. That should be in your packet there. Obviously, the public has access to the information as well. So again, as I mentioned, be happy to answer any questions you may have, but the TMC modified proposal is the last column there. And we do also have a map for you that is right essentially in your packet there as well. And this was developed recently, so we'd be happy to put it up if anybody wants to talk about the map. This is not complete because some of the projects that were added on last minute don't have sufficient details with the limits to be able to map it. So anything that didn't have the limits from point A to point B, we were not able to capture it here. Again, this is a draft document. We'll continue to develop this document as we move forward. With that, Mr. Chair, that's my report, and I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mogimi. Does anybody have any questions before we get into the discussion part? So I'm looking right now just for questions of Mr. Mogimi on the plan, the TMC modified plan as it was presented, not what we're doing with, but just basically on any questions about how it got there. And by the way, first off, Thomas, I want to say thank you for joining us. We didn't acknowledge you earlier, and I want to tell you you've got a really good start of the year haircut going, so it's looking good. I hope everything's well. Okay, well, I do have a question for the executive directors, and that is you made a comment there that some of the projects that are now on here not on this endorsed list, and I know there's a lot of the things that were moved down into the safety element, transportation element. There were some structural changes too. Is there any way to tell from looking at this list what the new projects that were added? So they weren't discussed by either the CAC or us prior to this. They're now on there. Were they all discussed prior?
Yes, Mr. Chair, if I may clarify. Well, what I was referencing to was the map.
Correct.
So on the map, there are certain things that we were not able to map. On the spreadsheet, you have all the projects that were discussed. And the only way to tell the difference was that if there is a blank or a zero under CAC's recommendation, that means it was not recommended by the CAC. If there's a dollar amount in front of the project, that means that's new and was developed at the TMC level.
So, correct me if I'm seeing this wrong. Then when I look at the safety element, active transportation element, I understand what they went into more detail in there, but that all the way through, basically that entire element is projects that were not originally in either 4.2 or 5.1.
Correct. That was all developed by the TMC.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Well, one of those, and I don't know, because typically my understanding was that usually your smaller projects, name projects, bigger name projects go into the projects. I saw a couple of really high ticket items down in the safety element and active transportation element. One was 60 million, one was 30 million. So was that originally a name project and then it got moved to safety? And
There were quite a few projects that were initially submitted as part of the named projects that at the TMC meeting, they were moved from the named project submittals to the category.
Okay, and by extension of that, then it's gonna lock up more of those buckets, so to speak, right? As opposed to having some or
Yeah,
all of it.
correct. Again, if you recall by comparison, the CAC proposals 4.2 and 5.1 left a lot of that flexible to be determined over the life of the plan. The TMC proposal, basically, as you mentioned, names everything within that bucket.
Mr. Chair, that's consistent, however, with the direction that we gave to the TMC in our December 7th motion. We asked the TMC to follow up with all of the jurisdictions as to named projects that they wanted put in the various elements. They were supposed to confirm their roadway projects, and they were also supposed to offer any input as to named projects that they wanted in the safety and active transportation.
Absolutely.
Sorry. I somewhat disagree with the supervisor respectfully. We said identify programs. We didn't say put it in the program of the categoricals and take all the money to where we have no flexibility, which is what happened. It was identify programs you would be interested in putting in there. I think it's disingenuous to put a $60 million and a $30 million project in categoricals. There are things in the primary original capital improvements that are less than that. And I think we're not being honest with the people. They should have been in the original. If you just take them out of there in order to get funding for something else and put them all in the categoricals, and there's no flexibility for anybody there. I don't think that's right. And I don't think that's what we told them to do. We said identify. It didn't say put them all in.
Mr. Chair, I'm just referring to the language of the motion and the direction it gave to the TMC and how the TMC was supposed to follow up with the jurisdictions. I'm not getting into dollar figures or particular projects, just the language of the motion that we approved in December.
Mayor Romero.
That was being nuts.
Timing was perfect.
The city of Tucson has put together a list. We've shared it many times with this board as well as your city managers and the technical management committee. We had spent a year and a half talking about the named projects, and it got us really nowhere. And so what the city of Tucson, and we were very clear, we invited you to do the same in terms of putting a list of where you need your money, of named projects. We shared it with the CAC, we shared it with the TMC, we shared it with the community, mayor and council approved it. And at the end of the day, the reason we did that exercise is one, because of what I just mentioned, that going through the named projects, the corridor element was taking a year and a half and we were not getting anywhere. And so in order for us to move the process forward, because again, the goal of this board is to have a spring 2025 possible election. The time is of the essence. And so in order for the city of Tucson, its mayor and council, its city manager, and its Department of Transportation and Mobility Director, to be able to put our cards on the table. Hey, this is what we want. These are the needs we have. Let's do the same for all of these jurisdictions. And by the way, let's make sure that every jurisdiction has a healthy return on investment. These are the priorities of the city of Tucson. And we put them right there. We presented them here, and the TMC had an opportunity to discuss and be able to vote on a hybrid, by the way, which I think that the modified plan by the TMC is a hybrid plan. I think that was the spirit of the motion that you made. Struggling to call you chair or supervisor. Supervisor Scott, that was you wanted the TMC to work it out and bring us a hybrid of the CAC 4.2 and 5.1. That's what we have in front of us. And in the spirit of regional collaboration, I know that our city manager and our transportation director sat at a, what was it, 4-hour marathon meeting or more? And this is what we have in front of us. So I am kind of surprised that there's people that are surprised about these projects here. It hasn't been a secret. It's been put out there.
Mayor Romero, then I'm gonna take one comment. I'm gonna open it to actually some of the folks involved, and then I'll come back to Mayor Honey and Mayor Murphy in that order. But it was, my understanding, it was a marathon. And we have both Carmen DeBonis and Terry Rosemont here, who have been acting kind of as the TMC interactions with the board. So if either one of you would like to talk a little bit about the process you went through to get to where you are, or what was proposed with the, I should speak into the mic, what was proposed with the TMC modified plan, and Mr. McGovern with the CAC chairs also here, and I know he was present and watched those things too. So I think before we get into our discussion on what we like about it, what we don't like about it, what we're gonna, what we'd want to see changed or what we want to start moving around, I'd like to hear from them if they had anything from that process, because it was a 4-hour one, and I'm not sure how many meetings you had. I know you canceled one, so do either one of you want to give us an update?
Their work is done, I think.
Well, and you don't have to. If you want to be there, we may call you up when we get into some of the details and some of the debate, but if.
I'm sorry, can you go to the microphone so that the public can hear?
That way we can get on the record. I've been talking with my back to the mic for the last 2 minutes.
Whatever you're comfortable with.
So, Mr. Chair, Mr. Chair, I think, Carmine and I were liaisons with the CAC. Certainly we were at the meeting that we had, the marathon meeting. It was 4 hours and 48 minutes. Just saying. But
So sorry for you, because we've had those marathons here.
yes, I know. So I think if you talked to all of the people that were sitting at the table, you'd probably have a different perspective from each of the members. So for either Carmine or I, or both of us to comment, it was a lengthy discussion. There was a motion that was made by one of the jurisdictions. It was seconded. There was little discussion before the second was withdrawn. So, my perspective might be much different than, say, Mr. Ortega's perspective or, Mr. Dilly's perspective. So to give just, mine, I could certainly do that, but it's going to be just my perspective.
Good.
So, thank you, members of the board. I would just ask, you have the chair of the TMC and the vice chair of the TMC here as well. So from an overall standpoint, they may be able to speak to that context. As Terry indicated, we can give our perspective. I was involved in helping to put together the county proposal that was modified and ended up in the TMC modified recommended plan. So happy to answer any questions about our thinking on how we came forward with that plan.
Mr. Chair? Can I ask that the chair and the vice chair speak?
Yes, absolutely. I was gonna say, sorry for putting the two of you on the spot, but I'd also open it up to the chair and the vice chair if they'd like to add any comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll stand up. Interesting to see how this is really the hot mic because nobody wanted to take it back here. So what I will do is give you a thumbnail sketch, at least from my perspective, as the chair of the TMC, and I'll ask Jan to maybe weigh in as well, just as the meeting unfolded and not necessarily from the city of Tucson perspective, at least for this. So there was a lot of very lively discussion for 4 hours and 48 minutes to be exact. And I think that at the end, the agreement, if you will, or what's been recommended to you came about based on the evolution of the conversation. So what I'd like to do is go back to some of the points that were included in the motion and in the recommendations so that you understand kind of the spirit in which that was accomplished. So first of all, I'll just go through these one at a time. In order to come up with a $2.34 billion budget or expenditure budget, we realized that there were basically too many projects on the table. And so either some of the projects had to come off, or revenue had to increase, or there had to be a reduction in some of those pieces. So these aren't necessarily in the order, but these are, hopefully I can capture all of them. So first of all, there was a recommendation for $75 million to come from the regional funding. And I believe that's the HERF money that comes to the region. The discussion around that was very lively. The conversation was really focused on, we get about $23 to $28 million annually. That's what was stated. And so the thought was to take $5 million a year for the last 15 years, assuming that the first 5 years would be needed to complete RTA 1. So that 75 million is 5 million a year, which would still leave 18 million plus for regional projects. The second was a reduction of the debt service by $40 million. The dollars that were included, or the budget that was included, was 77 million. And so the suggestion recommendation was to reduce that amount by $40 million. So 37 million is still included for future debt service, but that was a piece of the dollars that came about. ADOT suggested $25 million would come from other sources to pay for other mainline improvements or the interchange improvements in Marana. So that helped in terms of reducing the cost to the RTA of that project. The city of South Tucson had a $35 million line item included. After their analysis and review, they realized that some of the improvements that they were looking for were included elsewhere, particularly in transit and other. And so after their review, they came back with about 22 million. We suggested to increase that to 25 million, which would have been a reduction. There is a reduction of $10 million. Let's see if I've left anything. A lot of discussion about transit. The conversation there really ultimately came to leaving the services that are provided today intact as best we could, but also making sure that there was a conversation around what those services look like going forward. In addition to that, adding 70 million for the high capacity transit. That was a City of Tucson request. The remainder would be allocated for expansion, and the total budget of that was 610 million. That left us, if you do the math on that, that left us right at about $40 million shortfall. So quite frankly, we took a break, and County Administrator Lesher came up to me and said, look, we're really close. Is there a way that the City of Tucson could shave $20 million off of their project list if we take the $20 million haircut as well? She has more hair than I do, but I said $20 million would be fine, in the spirit of trying to get to an agreed upon amount. That's pretty much the way we ended up here. And I don't believe that either of us have identified, at least we haven't identified where that $20 million would come from on the plan. Have you done it? Okay, they've identified. We have not, the city of Tucson has not. So that is the thumbnail sketch of the TMC. Jen, did you? So happy to answer questions on that aspect.
Thank you, Mr. Ortega. Does anybody have a question for Mr. Ortega?
You had a queue.
I did have a queue. I don't want to jump the queue, but I want to get, I'd like to get this information out. So if you've got a question specifically for any of these speakers, and then we'll go back, because this is going to be a process. We're going to have a lot of discussions on what's good, what's bad, and but I'd like to get their voices out so they can tell us how they got to where they are first. So do either one of you have a question for Mr. Ortega this time?
No, I do not.
Everybody?
I do. Alrighty, so based on the list, the modified plan, which I call the hybrid plan, was there any discussion at the TMC about the name project? So there's roadway corridor elements. And then as Mayor Murphy said, there's safety element and active transportation elements. Was there any discussion at the TMC about the details that were provided by the city of Tucson?
Thank you, Mayor. So, Mr. Chair and Mayor, there was a lot of discussion about that, and quite frankly, there was reservations with regard to solidifying all of the projects or all of the money in those categoricals without flexibility. And the conversation really led to making sure that the investment could be shown region-wide, as opposed to, well, we'll worry about that later. So it was trying to get to the specificity now, as opposed to waiting down the road to identify that. So there was a lot of discussion, but clearly the opportunity to identify projects gave everybody an understanding of what those investments were going to look like in the future. So that was quite a discussion.
Mr. Roseman, I know you.
Yeah, so I just wanted to highlight, I think, something that Mr. Ortega said, and there were a number of people that were concerned, myself being one of them, about naming and taking up all of the money in the categoricals for named projects. Specifically, the town of Marana, we didn't submit one because I really believe that that's not a good route for us to go. So there are no town of Marana projects in the categoricals related to safety and active transportation. The other concerns that we articulated was the small amount of contingency and the lack of the small amount of bonding capacity. Debt service, thank you. The other thing, and part of that motion that was articulated, and one thing that I made clear is that 25 million that was going to come from SPT monies that was going to reduce the amount that was coming from the RTA. Made it very clear that I was in favor of that and okay with that, provided it didn't hinder or reduce the scope of the project or didn't delay the project. In looking into this further and talking to a number of people, I do understand that it would delay the project. So that would be of grave concern to the town, and I think to the entire project, because the Cortero I-10 interchange project is one that should have done probably 15 years ago. So to delay it another 10 years would be, I think, very problematic for the program as a whole.
And I think it's important for clarification for all of us is the projects are here, but they have not been, we have not identified what quartile of the RTA next they're going to be done in yet. That's
yes
to come still.
Good question, Mr. Chair, members of the board. So we had already requested from all sponsors to give us their suggestion of which period they believe they can have the project designed and ready for construction, but that has not been finalized. We have the input, but that still needs to be identified and finalized.
Any comment from anybody else associated with the TMC, since I've kind of put you all on the spot? Mr. McGovern, do you have anything you'd like to comment on?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I just wanted to make one quick point about the CAC's proposals within the active transportation and safety elements. We had breakdowns within each of those elements that would be lost if we named all of the projects that have been named, or perhaps lost. We'd have to look, more carefully at the actual projects that are being proposed, but intersection safety and capacity, transit corridor, bus pullouts at grade, railroad safety and bridge deficiencies, technology upgrades to improve intersection traffic control, and greenways, pathways, bikeways, and sidewalk enhancements. Were all elements or sub-elements of those two areas which we now have named projects for. I would also say that the CAC did recommend to you that there be named projects within each of those elements so that people would understand when they go to vote that specific projects are going to be promised. We never got to the point of saying name them all or name the first quartile, although that was discussed at times, but we didn't act on that. Anyway, just those couple comments I wanted to make.
Thank you, Mr. McGovern. Anybody have any questions for Mr. McGovern? All right. Appreciate all the input from both the CAC and the TMC members. It was apparently a 4-hour and 48-minute conversation. There's been a lot of work for years put in to get where we are today. So I really hope today's discussion, we get all the things we're concerned with, all the others. Today, I view today's discussion more as let's start airing all the grievances. And then next time we sit down at the table, we can come up with the solutions. So everybody have thick skin and let's open it up. And Mayor Honey, I'll start with you.
Mine will take all the rest of the time for today. I want to talk a little bit about the 4.2 plan. And I know the author of that plan was primarily Brian Keeley, Deputy Fire Chief Northwest. And he called me about the plan before he submitted it at CAC. And I wasn't really happy, but I said I could hold my nose and do it. I'm going to tell you what kind of happened in that 4.2 plan. Transit was at 510. And Mr. Keeley added 100 million to transit to make it 610. And what he did is he took some of the prevailing name projects from everybody and started taking things off the bottom. And basically that freed up $100 million to go to transit. Well, then what happened is in the categoricals, the city came back and put the ones that were cut off in order to free up the money for another 100 million for transit in the categoricals. So we really didn't achieve anything. You just shifted the projects around. I want to talk a little bit about contingency and bonding capacity. Bonding capacity should not be included in this plan at all, because any time that this board as an RTA bonds, if staff comes in and says we need to do a bond, it has to be approved by this board anyway. So there shouldn't be a number there. And Mr. Rosema talked about it a little bit, the Cortero Road project, which I think equally benefits Marana, Pima County, and the city of Tucson, and a little bit the state. That's a huge project. If you limit bonding, it'll push that project 7 or 8 years down the road. And, I think that will benefit 3 major entities here immensely. If you don't have bonding capacity, you're not going to be able to do that early in the plan. So I don't see any reason to even have bonding capacity in there. We have to approve it anyway. If the CEO or anybody comes back and says we need to bond for $50 or $60 million, we have to approve it. If you put a limit in the plan that goes to the voters, you don't get a choice. It's locked in at 30 million or 25 million or whatever. And that's really almost a game killer. And I want to talk about contingency a little bit. You mentioned that I have some history with RTA 1. RTA 1 was $2 billion. 2007 was a banner year after the first year, and we were just rolling in the dough. 2008 really started going downhill, and in 2009, people were jumping in front of cars. And it was a horrible year. But what we did, and this is where the bonding thing comes in, is the board CEO and people came back and said, you know what? We're in a really depressed economy, but a lot of these transportation builders and stuff are willing to build these jobs really at cost. What they were trying to do is make their, I talked to a few of them, make the payments on their trucks and Caterpillars and pay their people. They didn't want to make a dime. They just wanted to keep them working. And we bonded big time to do some of those projects. And the whole idea, Mark Reeder came in and talked to us about financing, was the interest on the bonds was a fourth what the savings was going to be as far as wages and getting the projects done for bonding. So that's my argument for bonding. I really think you just have to leave that open and let this board make a decision. Contingency. What we did in that $2 billion bond, this is this current one we're in, we may collect 1.6 or 7, but we put 300 million from PAG in there. We're going to put more than that. We're still putting money in. We used up the $100 million contingency, and we're still $200 million short. If we don't have contingencies and we don't have the ability to bond, we're going to get about halfway through this program if it's approved. And all of a sudden, we're going to be out of money. We're not going to have any contingency money. We're not going to have the ability to bond. And then you only got one place to go, and that's go back to PAG and take all the money again, like we did about 5 years ago. When we started this plan, we had a talk about this table about not robbing PAG to run the RTA. And I think everybody here will admit that. That was that discussion. We're not going to rob PAG. That PAG money belongs to all of us. And if we have something, 83 flood, and I don't care if it's spent in Tucson, Pima County, Marana, Cerrito, or where it's spent, and we have roads washed out and bridges washed out, and we have a horrible catastrophe here, a lot of that PAG money, both in the state and the federal, is set up for those kinds of programs. If you pull all that money out and put it in the RTA, you don't have that money. So you're just kind of out of luck. So I think realistically, bonding and contingency are pretty important. We talked about $40 million in contingency. It's my understanding, just with the projects, city project, county project, and the Marana project that we pushed into RTA next, we'll spend the whole 40 million right there. So then we don't have any contingency. We're going to spend the 40 million in the first 3 projects because we pushed them so far down the road in the cost expansions and everything else. So I think we need to be pretty careful with what we're doing here.
So Mayor Honey, can I clarify one of the things? Because I heard you talk a lot about having bonding capacity. But then you also said you don't even see it shouldn't be in the plan. Did I misspeak?
Well, what I'm saying is a limit shouldn't be in the plan.
Right.
If you put a limit of 25, 37, I mean, it's been running all over the place. I can almost assure you that's not going to be enough. This is a $2.34 billion plan. Don't limit bonding capacity, and 37 might not be enough for one big project.
Mayor Honey, I agree. I'm going to ask, before I go to Mayor Murphy, I'm going to ask the executive director for one clarification. So whether we put 37, 77, or the original 100, million in there for bonding capacity. Does that lock us at the max, or once that's spent, can we still approve further bonding as a board? So my understanding was that was the planned amount for bonding, not the limit.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, we need a line item to demonstrate to the public that that reserve is going to be used for that purpose. And the plan itself has to be fiscally constrained. So if you decide to go above that amount, that cap, by definition, that means you have to bring the funds in from something else that's already on the plan. So I think what Mayor Mahoney was saying, that you have that capacity, but you would have to make that decision in the future. But as far as capping it, there's not really a cap. It's making sure that on the ballot, it's identified as a reserve, and obviously an amount that's reasonable as a reserve. The CAC, the two options that the CAC recommended, both of them use $77 million as that amount. The 2006 RTA plan had $100 million for that purpose.
Thank you for that clarification.
Mayor Murphy. Yes, couple points. Back from our previous meeting, just a couple hours ago, I agree with Mayor Romero that if you're at the committees and those things, they make the recommendation to us, but at the end of the day, whether it's about a budget or spending, it falls on us. So I really saw, and I thank, the CAC and the TMC, but I saw that as the tool, to get something to us to actually have that conversation. So that was one point. When Supervisor Scott, was talking about the motion, from my perspective, when the county, we had 4.2 and we had 5.1. And when I saw your county proposal, I kind of saw that as in between 4.2 and 5.1. So, I had a comfort level there to tweak it. I guess when I spent a lot of time over this last weekend going through this, I kind of saw that we ended up with 5.1 plus plus. So instead of kind of being in the middle, we were going, to the further than I thought the county's plan originally that you put on the table, that we were outside of that boundary. I know we're talking about all the jurisdictions, and correct me, I have a lot of, just different points that I saw, but I may not be right. I saw the Tohono O'odham Nation. I don't see anything for them. I don't see a corridor project. I don't see safety. I don't see active management. Did I get that right, or did I read that right? Is there nothing in
Mr.
there?
Chair, yes, members of the board, Mayor Murphy. Obviously, when we started this process, we had sent a request from the CAC chair to all members. At the time, representatives from Tohono O'odham Nation identified that they do not have any corridors, but they would like to benefit from those future buckets as they have done in the 2006 plan. Recently, when the request was sent out, they did not submit any projects for the active transportation or safety. So you're correct. This plan does not include anything for Tohono O'odham.
Right, but from what you're just saying, at least in my opinion, if we lock up all of the buckets and the contingency at the need, whether it's a flood of 83 or the TO comes with something, there's no capacity to do that with that. If we
That's correct.
And I never disagree with my town manager from that, but we were having a discussion, and I think Mayor Honey brought it up too on the contingency, because I was kind of thinking that we were eating a lot of that up on the overlap or overlay. I think, don't want to speak for Shane, but I think he was thinking that was the 40 million was going to be for the life of the project. Can you just clarify? I don't want to arm wrestle him. He's much younger than I do, but
Yes, definitely. And I again appreciate the question. I've had this question from multiple people since then. I coordinated with Thomas as well to make sure that we're both on the same page. So the statute requires, if we have an election in May of 2025, that the current plan will cease to exist on April 1 of 2026, and the new plan and the new tax will start on April 1, 2026. I put a little chart together, which we have shared previously with the CAC and TMC. Initially, when we started this, could you pass that out, please? Initially, when we started this, we were looking at a 4-year overlap. And you remember at the CAC meetings, we had this discussion. Initially, it was a 4-year overlap. Now we are looking at only 3 months. So it's not as much of an overlap anymore, but if you look at our projections, the revenue for those 3 months would be roughly about $40 million. So you are correct. Day one, the $40 million would be the overlap between the current plan and the next plan to pay for the invoices, finishing projects. And again, I hope this is helpful. We'll pass it out to anyone else that's interested as well, but that's just, statute requires that that delay in implementation of the new plan. Had it been obviously earlier, then we would have had a much larger need. And that's when we came up initially, when we were looking at potentially 2024 for an election. Initially, we were looking at a larger amount. Now $40 million for this purpose is sufficient.
So literally we would start the new plan with zero.
Correct.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, if you look at the plans, there's the under contingency, they broke it out into 2 lines on these charts. The 40 million only exists in the overlap funding needed, and that's only in 4.2 and TMC.
Right.
But the economic and inflationary contingency as it's listed here is 0 across the board.
Right. And I know we've had many conversations about lessons learned, so to speak. And I know we'll get into these discussions, but pandemic, couple of recessions, reduced revenues. A lot of the points were already hit, but also on the bonding capacity, I sort of look at the analogy of, I can save for my house and not have the benefit of it for 15 years or something, or I can take a loan and actually enjoy it. And knowing what inflation has done, I'd rather enjoy it earlier at a lower rate than holding it later on, because that $400,000 home 15 years from now won't be $400,000. So I would have great concern on the bonding capacity. And I just found it, I had a meeting earlier before this meeting, and I've talked a lot about bus pullouts myself and how, as a Sahuarita resident, I love bus pullouts. I was coming up Stone. I stopped behind a bus, so there wasn't a bus pullout. And all the traffic got crazy. And the same bus I followed up, and then it had a bus pullout, and I got to go. So I know the city has its own priorities, but I think of it from a voting standpoint. Why would a Sahuarita resident or a Green Valley resident, want to vote for the plan? So I was a little sad to see that all the bus pullouts were zeroed out. In it.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Mayor Murphy, that is correct, and Mr. McGovern touched on that too. So the CAC proposal had $10 million under safety, under 4.2, under 5.1, they had $10 million, but they moved it to they moved it to corridors. But yes, this plan, by naming everything else, there's no money set aside for bus pullouts in the TMC.
And when I see safety and active transportation, that to me is one of the for me as a citizen, that, I think that resonates really well from that perspective, but we don't have those pullouts.
Mayor Murphy, if I could add one thing there, because I think that goes in concert with the, Chairman McGovern's chairman. You were the chair of the CAC. We'll keep calling you that, Tom, but his concern about there was a lot of definition that was undefined on where it would go, but it did put different issues. So I think that's something we've got to look as we go through here. But that being said, I think some of these other elements there are projects that a lot of us haven't seen yet, undefined, and I don't know, there's a potential to have bus pullouts built into those projects. So I wouldn't say that necessarily bus pullouts are eliminated, but they're either defined by these projects. There's no extra dollars to go in and do a corridor of bus pullout.
Right. Because if we have 0 buckets and we're not naming it, then by its extension, in my mind, that's 0. At the end of the day. And I'll just stop a little bit after one more. The other one was because I agree with Mayor Honey that, again, the lessons learned. We fell short, and we swept every outside money, and we still fell short of all the other PAG monies. And could you just clarify, because Shane and I have had this discussion on this too, on what percentage of outside PAG monies
would be swept over the next 20 years if we just took this as it stands now.
It might be easier, Mr. Chairman Murphy, it might be easier to start with the 2006 plan, just to put it in perspective. It's difficult to project over the next 20 years, what the cost increases might be. But again, looking at the 2006 plan, and Mayor Honey touched on it as well, we'll probably end up from the 2.1 projection for the 2006 plan around 1.7. So that's roughly $400 million that was not collected from the RTA taxes. That $400 million plus some was made up from PAG regional funds, PERF, and federal funds. And I say plus some because we're actually going well into fiscal year 29, and we're going to continue to have additional PAG dollars to complete those projects. Cost increases alone within the last 2 years, in my perspective, have been significant enough that by the time we finish the entire current RTA plan, you're looking at anywhere between $600 to $800 million of additional expenses that didn't come from the RTA.
Right. And the way this exists now that it came to us, are how much of that past 2029 outside money is going to be needed for this?
For this plan, thank you. Yeah. So for this plan, as it's proposed, the initial 5 years of this plan, everything is spoken for. It's locked to finish the current RTA plan. The balance of 15 years of additional PAG funds, roughly 800 million of that is identified here as well. So that's already locked in. Most of it for ADOT projects, about $75 million for the active transportation project. So we're already locking in almost $800 million of that future 15-year fund.
Right, and what would that percentage, that 800 million, is it, we would get 100 million? And
no, yeah, to put it in perspective, the ADOT projects kind of skew the percentages, but that's almost 40% of future dollars.
40%, that's what I was trying to get to. Yeah. What percentage of future dollars that we're already starting and locking up, and we didn't start the last plan locking any of these dollars. And we ended up using all of them.
So again, the ADOT projects kind of skew that number, but if you're just looking at the $75 million, that's as described earlier, that's only $5 million out of potentially $25 million.
Supervisor Scott.
A key component of the county proposal that we put forth after the January 4th TMC meeting at the January 17th meeting uses a percentage of 12.6 funds. It is, as you can see on line 98 of your spreadsheet, and Mr. Ortega referred to it in his comments, because the entire TMC agreed to it ultimately, is $5 million per for STP a year for the last 15 years of RTA Next. That means that we still have a substantial amount of other funds, state and federal funds, coming into the region for other purposes. But I think we, as a board, and I'm not questioning this, but it's just fact. We constrained the TMC because we told them, as we told the CAC, we didn't want them to go above the existing half cent. Even though we have authorization from the legislature to go up to a full penny if we wanted to, we have said in this body, and I agree with it, that we stick with the existing half cent. So in order to deal with all of the projects that all of the jurisdictions wanted, we came up with that proposal that we presented on January 17th. And it's $40 million annually in regional HERP and STP. And only, so 5 million of that is going to the RTA. That's 12.5% of those regional funds. 12.5% of those regional funds on an annual basis. is our calculation. And again, the entire TMC added that as part of the TMC modified proposal. But we brought it forth because we wanted to find some way of supporting the projects that all of the jurisdictions identified, again, as part of the motion that we passed. But it's on an annual basis, when you get to those last 15 years of RTA Next, it's 12.5% of the regional funds. That means 87.5% of the regional funds are still available for other purposes.
And that's where I was confused, because I thought there was a big percentage of that had to be made up for work with ADOT. So I didn't understand it as 12% of the future 15-year regional funds.
That's 12% annually.
Or 12% annually, right, of the next
12.5
of the next 15 years. But so could you clarify that?
Be
Because I'm
happy
still
to.
confused.
Yes, Mr. Chair, if I may, Mayor Murphy. So again, as I mentioned earlier, the ADOT projects really skew that percentage because it's roughly $700 million or so that's going towards 4 ADOT projects. So those regional funds are committed to ADOT projects. So that's where I came up with roughly 40%. But if you subtract that out, if you're looking at just 75 million, then 12.7% is just for non-ADOT projects per statute.
Right, but the overall numbers we used 75 million, not what we had in the original 2006 plan.
So yeah, initially, good question. So initially, it goes back to what Mayor Honey is saying. Initially, we weren't relying on using PAG dollars for contingency. We ended up using PAG dollars for contingency to a tune of almost $400 million.
And Executive Director, the 2006 RTA 1, as we call it, what was the budget or the forecasted economic numbers that we used? Did we use? I know the answer, but
yeah, I thank you. Appreciate it. Good.
Did we use baseline or do we use pessimistic?
Yes, good point. So we did use the baseline, and the baseline was roughly $2.1 billion. The pessimistic estimate would have been roughly 400,000 lower. So that's why this time around we're using the pessimistic estimate. But again, what I'm saying is that even with the pessimistic estimate, we're still tapping into future PAG dollars.
Right.
So we still need at least another $300 to $400 million to finish the project.
Right, and when I think of our jurisdiction, Rome, Walden Grove, there's an intersection there we're having difficulties with. So my concern is if we tap, all of these monies, low bonding, no contingency, tapping from day one the PAG resources, the unexpected, which is going to happen, my biggest concern that we're not learning from our lessons learned from literally the same time frame that we're in on RTA 1. This is like 20 years ago, but it's ceased. We're still. I'll show.
Mayor Winfield.
In regards to the PAG funds, I don't believe personally that we as a board should be tying the hands of the future board. I can't speak to the rest of you. I can only speak for myself. I'm not going to be here in 15 years. And so I just, philosophically disagree with tying the hands of the future board. I also disagree with just simply sweeping PAG funds for a described plan, a tax-based plan, taking that to the voters. I think the intent was for RTA to supplement PAG, not for PAG to supplement RTA. So I just have a general disagreement with that. But this may seem, I support the modified plan, the more closely it aligns with 4.2. The further it departs from 4.2, I have less support for it. For a variety of reasons. I mean, I have some concerns about flexibility, especially in the categorical areas. I think the way that this has been presented, we lose flexibility. I appreciate the fact that there's an interest in having examples And if there are examples, I suspect that each jurisdiction will have priority projects. If they, then maybe we list a priority project from each jurisdiction so that when I go to my voters, I can show them an Oro Valley project versus, and of course, the entire thing, but I think it would just be more helpful. But I think tying up all those funds by listing specific projects, I think personally, I think it's a mistake because of removing the flexibility. And in terms of contingency, the forecasting is different this time around. It seems like we have learned our lesson.
Mr. Chair, Mayor Renfield, again, we did consider a more pessimistic estimate, and there are assumptions that are more conservative. But again, as I mentioned, comparing to the previous plan, we would still be about $200 million or more off, even using the pessimistic estimate. So the contingency obviously would be helpful. If not, we want to go into this with an understanding that if you don't have a contingency, then you would again rely on PAG funds to essentially become contingency.
I'm not arguing against contingency. I think contingency is important right at the moment. It looks like the contingency we have just simply is for the overlap. And I agree with Mayor Tony, and that's just from past. Let's learn from what we've experienced rather than thinking somehow the future is going to be different. Because I suspect that it won't be. I think that's
it. So, Executive Director, could you remind us the difference between the baseline economic forecast we received and the pessimistic for this plan?
For the current plan, I wish I had it handy, but I believe it was about $400 million.
So it was about 400 million. And so the first one, as I recall, I believe it was about 400,000 between the two estimates.
No, it was million as well.
Oh, it was 400 million
Million.
overall for the entire program. So if they'd gone pessimistic last time, in theory, we ended up going about
always still 300 million.
about 300. Okay. And Romero.
So I appreciate the many hours of input, especially from CAC and TNT members. Actually, one of the reasons why the hybrid or TMC modified plan is interesting and something that Mr. Ortega, holding his nose, voted forward to the RTA board is because it's descriptive in the projects. Because again, one of the issues that I've been bringing to this board over and over again for the last 4 years is that there has to be a return on investment for the Tucson taxpayers. And one of the ways that we can assure our voters that there's going to be a good return on investment on the issues that the Tucson voters have expressed very clearly they want to see investment is that there is a called out projects on the safety element and active transportation element. Actually, as a matter of fact, I believe that the more we disclose in terms of projects on the categoricals, the more transparent and the better it is to have an informed electorate. We have done acrobatics to remain the conversation at this table. And, I'm not satisfied with the amount of money in transit. I am not satisfied with the amount of money for the Tucson taxpayers in the main corridor element. And one of the ways that the city of Tucson has been able to stay at the table, continue talking, is because we can tell that some voter, there's these things, there's transit, we've been wanting, there's the safety and modernization. We've talked about modernization for the last 3 years. And by the way, Mayor, we don't like bus pullouts. It's not good for transit. But you know, that's the difference, right? Of the needs we have. I do see Sahuarita having named some of the safety elements, and Oro Valley has named some of the safety elements, and Pima County has named some of the safety elements. And so I think it's a good exercise to be as clear and transparent with the voters as we possibly can, and assure that there's a good return on investment for all of the region's taxpayers. So, you know, I think we still absolutely need to do much more work on this hybrid plan presented by the TMC. But I actually appreciate, even though I'm not happy with this hybrid plan, I actually appreciate that there is much more detail and and it's not a mystery. There's no question marks about who's getting what in the safety element. The safety element for the city of Tucson is a very important piece because it is different than we've had this conversation over and over and over and over again at this table. There's different needs, and of course, Marana is going to have its roadway corridor elements that you're very, very clear about the importance of Port Charles. I get it. We are very, very clear about the importance of the safety elements, and this is the area where the city of Tucson needs the investment. So I would much rather have clarity and transparency than have question marks about how the safety element and active transportation elements are going to be divvied up after the voters approve.
Thank you, Mayor Honey.
Thank you. I agree we need transparency, but if it takes flexibility out of the plan, I think it hurts. We didn't submit a lot of things for safety and some of those other things because we thought it was going to be open for, you know, as we need projects along the road, big storms, fires, whatever happens, wherever, that we have some funds to play with a little bit. I was going to kind of respond to what Mayor Winfield said, you know, and talking about the contingency and stuff like that. We're kind of at a point, if we're not careful with contingency, what we're going to end up with on this plan, and I'm not going to be here either, but I'm going to be looking down yelling.
Sure, sure.
But we're going to end up killing projects in the fourth quarter of this plan because we spent all the money in the first 3 quarters. And I don't want to do that. I would like to have enough contingency, enough openness in the categoricals, stuff like that, that we pretty much could get through with everything. And even the 12.5% on the HER, if you start adding what's obligated for ADOT projects, it really is a lot more. And I'm just trying to keep some of that money flexible for things we need to do in the future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, no, well, I appreciate Mayor Winfield bringing up the point about sort of binding future. I hadn't really thought about that before, honestly, and tying their hands, and don't want them looking back at us, either above or below, and saying, what were you guys think? That was one. And I was actually open. I think I've said it at this table before, to the mayor's point, that I didn't mind some of the categoricals being identified. I'm okay with some of that. When I think of unincorporated areas, you know, Green Valley, Arivaca, Abra Valley, Vale to some degree, unless there's a categorical bucket where there's some flexibility, they're not going to get a name project. But I don't know how I go to the Green Valley folks and say, well, there's nothing in there for you on a name. All the categoricals have been locked up. but please, and they vote about 80-90% down there, please vote for it, but you're getting nothing. So, and as the needs arrive, they'll be smaller in money, which comes out of the category. So I was okay with moving some of that to, try to work together, but it just wasn't comfortable with all of it. And then Mayor Winfield's point about sort of binding all this money, from sweeping it, from other council members that are sitting there. Because
Mayor Diaz, do you have any thoughts that you'd like to add on these plans, and or at least what you're feeling right now as far as what direction we should start moving towards, or we're talking about?
Just that, because the budget has been identified, total budget. Projects can be completed if the funds become available, like we're talking about. But it's still the fact that the process that was kind of put together leads to, which is more important than the other. Which side is more important than the other? Could, for us little South Tucson, it's kind of we're stuck with the priorities are economic development versus the safety and the other, so our balance is quite different. And we appreciate the fact that the money has been allocated to the safety, different parts. But again, if we stick with the overall budget, I feel that we can complete this.
Chairman Yucapicio, you want to add anything before I start? Because I'm gonna have a list.
We're gonna be next 3 days here. I put my whole list.
No, I've already.
Today, just like Mayor Honey, our families live in all your communities, and they all drive our roads. They all live in those areas, and safety is a huge concern. Way back then when I was young, Silver Bell was the way to go to Marana, and a lot of travel. When you see a lot of crosses all the way that way, you go to Sahuarita, it was the old road that way. There was no new freeway, and it's always been a concern. I think my concern now is we don't have enough money to do every single thing, even here, because in 5 years, you're not gonna have enough money to do a construction job of any of these things. It'll go up. And the question then becomes the mobility of your budget that was allocated. You're gonna have to prioritize with the RTA. What's more important, like Mayor said? Is it this part, or that, and maybe this gets put on hold for a little bit? Hate to do that, but that's what's gonna happen. And then you start looking at the overall plan, and Mayor Winfield, if we don't budget and strategically look at the future 10, 15 years from now, those that are coming in will have their hands tied. There ain't gonna be a whole lot of money for them neither, but you have to do it in a sense, because then it'll be their job to figure out how they put all the pieces to the puzzle if we leave them short. For me, I think sitting here now, how many terms now with you, sir, and Mr. Murphy, some of us older guys, we look at every single need. I really appreciated the gentleman that came from Colossal Cave, because I drive once in a while over there, and other than the big trucks that go there, it's kind of dangerous. And it's us from the city that drive over there. So he's asking for help. How do we help him? It is a corridor to go out there, and it is a gem out there to see the caverns and everything else. But the mobility and transportation is a safety thing. And I started looking at all of us here, and we can only imagine and look at, let's say, the next 4 or 5 years here, because after that, it becomes a bigger thing. It'll way bigger. By that time, the population of the city of Tucson will be big. Marana will be bigger than ever. Sahuarita is growing, and Oro Valley, I remember when it was all farming out there. There was hardly anything, and now it's changed.
and it'll change again. And that's what we have to do as mayors and leaders of our community, accept the change and figure out how you can help the change. Yeah, it's money, but none of us will ever have a lot of money, neither federal government neither. We're trying to fix all these bridges that are outdated and are falling apart and all that stuff throughout, America. But I really like the conversation and, some good people here fighting for, their regions and but that's what we're here for. What is here for? We put a whole lot of burden on the staff and a lot of things, and thank you guys for doing all the work for all of us. But sometimes it's hard for them even to figure out, how are they gonna put this together to make sure that when it comes to here, we're making decent decisions. Maybe not great, but livable decisions.
Absolutely.
I think that's my input in this, and you saw our little piece, it's just a little quarter that way, but there didn't used to be a road there. The only reason it became a road, Camino del West, is because we needed water. And when Governor Babbitt signed water to get to our reservation, it became a road. That's how we started with Camino del West and Valencia that way. But it is a corridor that feeds, our reservation, and it's important here. And even though it's a small project compared to some of the other ones in the other municipalities, it's important, and it is important to you guys. So I really like the conversation, and somebody ordering dinner because we're gonna keep you here till.
And Chairman, you can PC, I'll promise you, we're not gonna miss dinner. Everybody's gonna get out of here at a timely manner. I'm gonna save my comments to the end because I want to give us some ideas on going forward and what we're gonna come back at the next time we get together to what we've got to work on. So right now I've got Mayor Murphy, Mayor Romero, and then Supervisor Scott.
And I lied. I said I was gonna shut up, but I have one more comment. The chairman made me think of it. I remember being at the state report a couple of days ago, and when the governor announced the money coming from the feds, turning I-10 from 2 lanes to 3 lanes. And I guess I would just ask that we all look through that filter. Are we adding capacity? Are we gonna get across town quicker, or out to Colossal Cave, or coming down I-19 as opposed to Old Nogales Highway like we used to do? So I think for the voters, if we can think from a capacity standpoint, it's not the regional beautification authority or whatever else, it's the regional transportation. I think if we can at least focus as much on that as possible and add capacity, make it easier, I think we're gonna plan.
Mayor Romero.
Well, I did not add one comment. That's a very important comment. My council has continued to be crystal clear about the need to include whatever you want to call it, pavement preservation or capital maintenance. That is something that we've been talking about and asking for quite a while. So I have said, and Mr. Ortega has said, Mr. Predio have reiterated that pavement preservation for capital maintenance is a priority for the council. And this is not covering any residential road repair, pothole repair, as others have said before on this table. This is the investment from the RTA 1 that the taxpayers in this region have paid into, and how to maintain those assets. Why are we here right now? Because 30 years ago, the PAG didn't plan on helping preserve the capital that has been built for the last 50 years in this region. And so even though I know where you're coming from, Mayor Winfield, I think it's irresponsible that we don't plan ahead in terms of funds, especially from PAG, federal funds that are coming in and state funds that are coming in to this region, so that it supports the investments that taxpayers are doing for the last 20 years and into the next 20 years. I'm a mom of 2. One of them is 17, he's a senior and graduating in May. The other one is 14, about to go into high school. And guess what? When they were born, I started a 529 plan for them. I started thinking ahead, 18 years ahead. I want them to be able to have some money that we put aside, that even though sometimes it hurts, because we're tied every month, we put aside money for their future. That's exactly what we're responsible to do. We have to put money aside for the future generations that are coming through. And PAG funds, which are federal and state funds, should be fair play. Should be fair play. So again, I said at the beginning of my comments, I still am open to continued discussion. But the priorities of mayor and council and the citizens of Tucson have to be reflected in whatever plan is put towards in front of the voters, because voters, taxpayers in Tucson are gonna ask me, like, why are you getting into this if it's not a good return on investment for us? And then, by the way, it's not what we want invested in. Capacity is something that we sure absolutely need to look at. I'm very worried about that capacity on I-10, on Kino interchange, going to the airport. I understand that capacity. I want it to happen. I understand that capacity that we need to expand on I-19 because of what it means to our economy. Capacity in Tucson is not as big of an interest. We are willing to make sure that those projects are there. Harrison, all of these other projects that are RTA projects that we believe are regional interest are on our list. But there's still work that we need to do, and capital maintenance is something that we really need to make sure that we're looking at so that we don't saddle your mayor of Marana in the next 20 years with bridges and roads that there might not be enough money in your budgets to be able to.
Thank you. Supervisor Scott.
Mr. Chair, when I was first appointed to be the county's representative to the PAG Regional Council and the RTA Board, I was appointed by the chair of the board. And then I was retained by the current chair of the board. But recently, we decided to talk about board leadership positions as an entire board. And I'm pleased that my colleagues allowed me to continue in this position. And one of the things I said when I asked them if they would is that something I have tried to be mindful of ever since started doing this work in January of 2021 is that all of you have one thing in common, which is that you are all county residents. And so the county, and I'm not just talking about myself as the county's representative on this board, I'm talking about Ms. Lesher and Mr. Bonus and Ms. Skinner and Ms. Hiller from my office, because those are the folks I meet with before every meeting. And we put this motion forth on December 7th. And just in the interest of context, I wanted to read it again. It said, beginning with 4.2 and 5.1, we were directing the Technical Management Committee. Beginning with 4.2 and 5.1, continue to refine a plan for RTA board consideration at the January 2024 meeting. Second, receive a presentation from the Citizens Advisory Committee and formal working group on their proposed categorical and sub-element framework. 3, request written input from all jurisdictions, confirming priority named corridor projects and identifying safety and active transportation projects. Incorporate identified named corridor safety and active transportation projects and ensure geographical distribution of benefits throughout the region and within each jurisdiction. Case in point, one of the some of the active transportation projects that we put forth as the county are in Green Valley, because we want to make sure that we are going with that geographic distribution of benefits throughout the region within each jurisdiction. Now, I'm very grateful to the members of the TMC. I think they probably all need cortisone shots after not just their 4-hour and 48-minute meeting on the 17th, but they had a long one on January 4th too. But it's been stated before, and it needs to be repeated. All of our jurisdictional representatives voted in favor of the TMC modified plan. My view is that it's a solid plan to take out for public review. However, I think it's very important in the interest of unity and expressing our belief in regional collaboration that we ultimately reach that same place of unanimity. We're obviously not going to do that today. So I wanted to make this motion, Mr. Chair, if I could. And it would be that each member of the RTA board shall consult with their staffs on any part of the TMC modified plan they believe should be changed, including additions or deletions. The RTA board will consider input from each jurisdiction at its next meeting. And I would offer that in the form of a motion.
You can direct everybody's staff to do that, to be honest with you.
Agree. So let's see first if we get a second and we can have a discussion on it. Is there a second for that motion? Due to lack of second, the motion fails. Any additional comments before I take the microphone?
The only comment I would have is I make it because it's obvious that despite the vote of your jurisdictional representatives, and again, unanimity from them made me very optimistic coming into this meeting today, but obviously you don't have that same level of unanimity. So I'm looking for a way to get us to the March meeting where maybe we can reach the same level of unanimity that they did on January 17th. And perhaps I can tell by your mischievous grin, General Maxwell, that maybe you have another way of getting us there. But I feel like we are so close. And these folks got us to that point where we are so close. I think all of us ought to make that equal commitment. That's why I made the motion. I respect that it died for lack of a second, but I certainly hope there is intention on the part of each elected official and on General Maxwell to, if you've got some beef with the TMC modified plan that had unanimity from all of our staffs, then the thing is that you need to say what your concerns are and how you want to fix them. Because otherwise we're going to be going round and round in March, just like we've been doing since this meeting started today.
I just wanted to make a little bit of comment on what my friend Mayor Romero made a comment about maintenance on RTA projects. I will tell you what the town of Marana does, and we did this thinking about what we were doing. Every penny we get from her revenue sharing in our town goes to road repair and maintenance, RTA projects and everything else. And we pay the staff wages. We're out there spending that money. We identified monies that we were getting from somewhere and do our own maintenance of the roads. You know, I think we're really getting in a pretty bad spot if we start doing maintenance on existing programs. What about new programs? And I just wanted to kind of put it to what we do. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mayor Romero.
Just one comment. I appreciate Supervisor Scott's motion, and I too feel like you do that, okay, well, the TMC voted unanimously for a hybrid plan that they brought to us, right? That they said, okay, we can live with this. So I see the TMC modified plan, or I like to call it hybrid, because I feel that it has elements of 4.2 and 5.1 in it. And there's been thorough discussion about what the needs of the jurisdictions are. The big difference, Mayor, one of my friends, is between Marana and Tucson. Well, Tucson's been around 100 years, and our infrastructure is heavy. That's why we have to spend a lot of time and money on the infrastructure we have. And any additional RTA investments, we would like to be able to have the RTA invest in capital needs. But saying that, the reason I didn't second your motion, Supervisor Scott, is because I don't think we're ready for any motions right now. I think we just need a continued discussion. Maybe we do the exercise of looking at the modified plan in each jurisdiction and do that exercise on our own. I just don't feel that we're ready for motions right now. I think we need a lot of work ahead. Not completely happy with the modified plan, but I think that we shouldn't scrap everything and start from scratch. I think it is a good starting.
I have one final comment, Mr. Chair.
Gentlemen, you can be seated.
Throughout the year and months, I've been getting a lot of emails from the public. And the public is asking, please include at least 30% or more improved transportation. And when I look at the whole list, whether it's safety or anything else, is it really based on transportation? And that's what I've been I don't answer a lot of mine because I think we haven't gotten to an understanding here as to exactly what is really, like you mentioned it very nicely there. You don't look at all the others. It's how do you get from one point to the other point with even the improvement right there by Gila River coming this way. But I do have to bring up that the public is asking us as a board to look at more and more, whether it's any town, city, county. That's basically what they're asking for, is how do we get safer and quicker and all that with a little bit more. They're asking for 30%. That's what all the emails, maybe more than a couple of thousand emails that I've gotten. You guys know that, but we cannot ignore that. The people are saying we want it safer, we want it quicker, and we want to get there with a decent amount of ease. And I understand, the towns and cities and all that, but the city itself is a big monster, and that's what I look at it. There's more traffic, there's more accidents, there's more biking, there's more than anywhere else in the southern region, other than the great state of, like you call it, Maricopa. But other than that, this is what's given us all this right here. And I do agree with Mayor Romero that, it's complicated, but you have an awfully bad situation here where the city and its internal component is busting at the seams. And how do we do that with more light rail or more busing, more everything? And at the same time, improving all the roads, but it's just like a pair of tennis shoes. You wear the same ones, go to practice, you go to school in them, you're going to wear them down real quick. And that's what our roads here in the inner city is happening a lot. And every time it rains, of course, all them potholes come back because all you did is put a Band-Aid and not fix it. So other than that, those people that have emailed for the last years or so, I still agree with you that we need to figure out a better way of funding really regional everybody from here to Oro Valley, Marana, Sahuarita, our transportation issues. So thank you. And thank you people for sending us the emails.
Well, thank you everybody for the discussion so far. And again, I haven't given my thoughts yet, but I'm going to. But this conversation's been phenomenal. And there's been a lot of comments that you've all made of what you like and you don't like about this plan or that plan. And so I want you to be aware of what, having looked at both the TMC modified plan compared to 4.2 and 5.1. And here's just my thoughts real quickly. We've got to make a decision on contingency. There's no doubt. And I heard a lot of conversation about contingency going forward. The pessimistic plan doesn't save quite as much as I want off the baseline plan. But I do think if we can put too much content, everything we ask to put back in, we're going to be giving up some project. Some either named project or some safety project or something's got to come off transit. So there's everything. So ultimately we are building a big puzzle. On contingency, the 40 million to me is not negotiable. We've got to finish the RTA one. That was something we said. So that's got to be in there under those contingency funds. And I'm open to having some contingency. So I think that's a conversation we've all got to take back to our folks and talk about what they want, what they need. The categoricals. Here's my concern about the current categoricals that came out. And by the way, to the TMC, yeoman's work. It was incredible. We gave you a near impossible ask. And the bottom line is if we like what they moved around or what they're doing or using future funds or not, they basically locked themselves in a room and said, we're not leaving until we have something. And they did it. And I think it is a good starting point for some of our discussion, but I'll explain what I think we should do moving forward from that point. But here's my concern with the categories. It's numerous. If we fill it with nothing but projects, that takes away any flexibility. The challenge with this RTA plan is it's a 20-year plan. So a lot of those safety improvements that we need now, we're going to spread over 20 years. It's not going to be immediate. If we do it immediately, then we're going to not have any funds to fix stuff 20 years down the road. So in my mind, I love the idea that we've got projects in there and I want to keep them in there. There's a couple of reasons, but I don't like the idea that our categoricals are 100% locked up. So I'd ask people to consider what's the balance that maybe is good in. What's the balance that's going to work there? That 20-year nature also creates problems. Yes, Vail was voted down. But if you look at the growth that was on the back of the letter that Mr. Anderson gave us of where the growth's going, a lot of it's going in what we classify as census designated population areas, CDPs. And that I've spoken a lot in public about the lack of funds we've got coming to this region due to our enormous size of unincorporated areas. Some of those areas are eventually going to become incorporated towns. If we take all the categoricals, spend all the money with projects here, when a Vail becomes Vail, not that it will, the voters have spoken loud and clear, but when Casa Dovis becomes something or some other community decides, hey, we want to be a town, we want to be able to self-govern. If they do that 4 years from now, there's no money in the categoricals for them to apply for. Because when I was speaking with the executive director about Vail, what would their role be if they incorporated? Where can they get RTA money? Because they believe they got a blanket check, and they don't. They have to apply for the use of the funds, and the only place they can apply for RTA funds is in the categoricals. So I'm a little concerned about that. So I think that's something we need to look at. The other thing we've got to remember, the only way we will have a approved regional transportation authority plan, one that's approved by the voters, is if we get 50+1. So as we have these discussions, we've got to think about the entirety of the community, and Chairman Ucapicio summed up what he's been hearing, but we've got to think of what is it going to be that's going to take to get that number. Otherwise, we'll go out there in May, we'll spend a lot of money campaigning, we'll spend a lot of money advertising, and then we'll be staring at, we've got 1 year until we lose funding for transit. Because remember, there's a large piece of funding in transit right now that funds the line, supports extra lines, extra time, capability. And it's just, without the RTA, we will make this community more difficult to get around, period. So we've got, those are my thoughts. Those are my concerns. What I heard today from you all is areas that we need to think about specific changes at our next meeting. Contingency funds. I think we've got to come up with a solution, because once we know what we're going to put in for contingency funds, whether it's 0 or it's 100 or somewhere in between, then we'll know how we have to adjust the rest of the plan. The other thing I heard from you is the use of PAG funds. I thought that was an incredibly creative idea, and I actually liked it because it was out of the box thinking. And there is some truth to sometimes elected officials, and I'm not one, but for your counties, you quite often spend money in advance when you bond or when you add a tax. So I'm not as concerned, But Mayor Winfield, you're absolutely correct. We're tying the hands of the board for flexibility. Anything we commit going forward takes some of that away. But we have to have a discussion and we either decide if that's on the table or not. Because as long as it's hanging out there, it gives us a way of not coming to a solution. So I think that's important for us to discuss. And then we already hit the percentage of the contingencies. Supervisor Scott, you were looking to try to get us going in some direction. What I heard today was I heard several members around this table mention their preference of 4.2. I heard several members around this table mention their preference of the TMC modified plan. What I didn't hear at all was support for sticking with 5.1. You know, we gave the guidance to TMC hoping we would have one plan to talk about. Right now we're sitting with 3. But what I would like to hear is would you rather go forward with all 3 of these plans on at this board at this time? Or would we like to reduce it to have 4.2 and the TMC plan as what we talk about with before we get together next time? Realize right now, as it stands, we've got 2 meetings, March and May. I'm not sure if that's going to be enough, but that's something, you know, we'll consider as we go down the road. Because we've got, if we don't have a plan by May, we are going to reduce or cut out the time we can go to the citizens. So is there anybody that wants to say anything about 5.1 or keeping that on the breakdowns? Because there's a lot of information we don't have here. We don't have what the funding and how it's distributed, because that's going to be something the voters are going to want to know. We don't know that. And I'll be honest, I think a lot of the reason you see all those projects in the city in there is because it makes the numbers that would be acceptable to the voters inside the city there in the safety. So we're going to have all those discussions before we go to the voters. The other thing is things that we haven't discussed that I think we've got a possibility to is flexibility in the plan. Think about it, there were several projects that were saved significantly or changed significantly with the vote of the board, but within the guidelines of what the intent of the project was. Broadway Road, First Avenue, there were some that were withdrawn because they realized that the county realized that the plan that was voted 20 years ago, it's a 20-year plan. That's a long time in infrastructure. We don't even know what the cars were to be driving like, 10 years from now are going to look like, or the buses or any other form of transit. So I think we need to build some flexibility into it. And if we are going to name projects in the corridors, in the categoricals, I think we need to consider, do we want to have a 5-year review? Or we can add, every municipality can bring projects and we can add them. Basically, we're approving them kind of in a block versus taking them on a project by project basis. Thomas and the executive director will have to tell me if anything I'm proposing at a later date. But those are the kind of conversations we may have to have. But I think first we've got to tighten up our plan. So Mayor, and then Mayor Winfield.
I too am thinking how we get to 50% plus 1. I really am. But frankly, I don't see how we get to 50% plus 1 without the Tucson voter. And I'm only representing what my council, what our community, our residents have clearly expressed they're interested in. And yeah, you are absolutely right. The reasons that we're adding projects in the categoricals is because we want to make sure that the Tucson voters' priorities are clearly stated. I actually like the idea of having the named projects and say, hey, I've been pretty successful in bringing some federal funds to this community. We should review at 5 years if a particular project in the city of Tucson list doesn't need RTA funds anymore. Maybe we completed it, maybe we successfully applied for a grant and brought money in from the state or the federal government, or we do bonding. So I like that ability to be able to say it's the big problem that we had with RTA 1, and that the city of Tucson had to face with Broadway and First. Oh, well, we said 20 years ago that it had to be 8 lanes. Well, guess what? People don't want that anymore. And so we should build that type of flexibility. But the list that we have And that piece, the modernization, the safety element, the transit element is something that I am going to continue advocating for. And, you know, having a question mark in that category and not assuring the Tucson voter and taxpayer that we have a certain percentage of, you know, the investments that are going to happen within the next 20 years is not something that I can commit.
Mayor, I fully agree with you, and that's why that's one of the decisions that next time we get together, we got to decide how full we want those buckets or not. And that's something we're gonna have to work towards a solution. I fully understand your position. Mayor Winfield.
I support dropping 5.1.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Okay, hold on. Is that a motion?
I was just giving you my.
Oh, just-
I moved to drop 5.1.
I'll second the motion. Okay, I've got a motion and a second by
Discussion.
Mayor Murphy. Any discussion? Supervisor Scott?
Wasn't on that.
Well, okay.
I'll have something to say after we vote on this motion.
So the motion was to drop 5.1 from the list of 3, so we're narrowing it down to 2 plans that we're still
The hybrid and.
debating. Yeah, the hybrid and the 4.2. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so Executive Director, if you can, for the next meeting, you can take those off the chart so we can clarify and maybe get some more detail. We'll talk about that.
Sure, I do want to speak about my vote right now, dropping peppermint.
Yes, Mayor Romero, please clarify your vote.
I want to clarify that one of the reasons that I feel comfortable dropping 5.1, even though it does reflect more funds in transit, which is something that I am closer to, is that I do believe that the modified hybrid plan, as I like to call it, is the result of negotiations that were done by our jurisdictions. And so, again, I appreciate the many priorities that the city of Tucson and how they're reflected in the continuation of its reflection on the TMC hybrid.
And maybe we could change that to the TMC hybrid plan just for clarification going forward. But that's up to you, Executive Director. All right. Any other comments on or clarifications to their vote? Okay. Supervisor Scott.
I think it's very important that we not send any message to the community, especially to the people who we all know watch what we do very closely, of either dysfunction or confusion. And I think people in the community make the logical assumption that when our staffs vote for something, they've talked to us before they vote. I know Ms. Lesher and Mr. DeBonis talked to me before they voted on the 17th, and I'm assuming that everybody else's staff talked with them. So I think we took a giant step forward on January 17th with all the work that these folks did, not just that day, but on January 4th. And I think what I was trying to do earlier was say, all right, let's build on that. I recognize that there are folks around the table because the managers talk to each other and then they tell us what they're talking with each other about. So I knew there were people around the table who were pining for certain elements of 4.2. And I think that's important that those views be represented the next time we're together. That's what I was trying to accomplish with that motion. So if we're going to do those things anyway, go back and talk with our folks and then come back here in March with what our priorities are, what our concerns are, what our objections are, then that's great. But I think there's going to be people in the community who are rightfully asking, all right, what happened on January 17th and when all of your staffs voted for this, but you wanted to go back and talk about things again. I just hope we're not seen as taking steps backward after we took an extraordinary step forward, because I don't think they thought they were at that point on January 4th. I think a lot of people left that meeting on January 4th really concerned that there was going to be anything substantial or positive that happened on January 17th, but it did. And I think we need to honor that work and build on that work. And if building on that work also means going back and looking at some of the components of 4.2 that are of great importance to some of the jurisdictions, then let's do that. But I don't want to send the wrong message out to the community about what we're doing today and in comparison to what they did on the 17th.
Supervisor Scott, one of the things that I understand, totally understand your concerns. One of the things that I appreciated about the conversation today is we put it out there. A lot of times you talk about not wanting to see how the sausage is made. Well, in this environment, because it's RTA, because we are a public entity, we're going to be doing the sausage making in public. We gave them a task, they accomplished the task, they came back. I think we all knew coming in there wasn't going to be votes for the plan as was. And I think it would be way more harmful if we didn't have these discussions and if we started voting to try to get to that, let's put it up or down vote. We got to make it better. And there's a lot of the issues of the RTA that are not addressed in this plan. I mean, there's a lot of things that are going to go into what goes in front of the ballot, review periods. There's still conversation about capital maintenance, and we'll have that conversation. There's a lot of us that believe capital maintenance is built in all throughout this plan. So there is more to go. And I think what happened on January 4th, January 17th, and then here today is a sign that we're moving forward fairly aggressively. Because remember, how many years was it of work up to that point where January 4th, we didn't think we'd be able to get to where we are today. And now we're already in the part of refining, coming into more agreement and starting to have conversations and make the decisions that what we've got to do now is go, that's in, that's out. This is where we're going to go. And that's why so I think we're there. I don't think if the community is confused, it's going to be because people are talking and weren't listening. They were listening to the conversation. I think they will see we are making progress. My opinion. So, any other comments for today's?
Never ask that because I always raise my hand.
I was going to say, why'd you ask that? Just go to adjournment.
And Romero?
I feel you. I see you and I feel you, but I think even the hybrid plan needs additional. Like I said before, the city of Tucson has been asked to do a lot of acrobatics to be a regional player. And even with this plan that we have in front of us, the modified plan, I'm going to be very clear. I am not going to go back to 4.2. That is absolutely out of the question. And I believe that we need some clarity in terms of the transit element and see if that makes any sense for the taxpayers in Tucson. Because I'll tell you, we're running the numbers. We're running the numbers in terms of what we approximately generate and what the return on investment in terms of sales tax generation. And there are some communities, Tucson, Marana, Sahuarita, South Tucson, or Valley, that charge sales taxes. We live by sales taxes. There are other communities, Green Valley, Vale, and other unincorporated areas, Casas Adobes, that don't generate those extra sales taxes to be able to run and maintain their facilities. It's Pima County, basically, that's putting in the funds to manage and operate little towns that should be incorporated, but are not. And so that investment that goes to little towns that should be incorporated but are not, those taxes are going to those areas where they should be invested equally amongst all of us. And so for me, I say all of this because the city of Tucson cannot be asked to be a donor jurisdiction. Our taxpayers deserve a good return on investment. City of Tucson is one of the largest populations and jurisdictions, and one of the oldest jurisdictions at the table. And so it has plenty of needs. And so I am doing the work, again, doing acrobatics to be a regional player, but we can't, there's certain interests that we have with the funds generated by the Tucson tax.
Thank you. Chairman, you can PCO.
I want to thank Mayor Richard for making that motion, get rid of one and let's concentrate. I guess the overall feeling for me today is we've learned one size doesn't fit all. So you have to figure out what's your size and buy that shirt and wear it. But, you know, whether your public or your jurisdiction likes it or not, that's what we chose as a group. And I think it's a great, thank you, Chairman, for taking it to that level so we could put things on the table. I think we need to do this no matter what. So hopefully by next meeting, I look forward to it to see exactly what we're willing to look at. And then, you know, the hybrid or the other one, and then live with what we do, because like Mayor Whitfield says, if we tie up for so many years, as long as there's somewhere in there where you can amend, or like we said, because things will change. We know that. But, you know, I sometimes live on First Avenue, and I used to go to Frontier Drive-In a long time ago and get a Steerburger boat over there and a hamburger and a root beer. But my village is pretty close to that. So for me, I think it is important that we look, but there are some things that we all have to understand, that there is no perfect plan. It's what life dictates to us every 2 years, every 5 years, or 20 years. And thank you for a great conversation today with all of us.
I appreciate those words, and I've always said jokingly, but some seriousness, once we all get to a plan that, much like what the TMC did, they get to a plan where they all don't like it, but they're willing to vote for it. The key is, I feel really strongly that we need the folks around this table all voting for that plan, whatever it may be. And this is just the first conversation. It's going to take more. I mean, it's going to take more. We're going to have more times when we are going to have some disagreements go forward, but as long as we're all at the table, having the conversation, doing the acrobatics, and trying to work to stay here and get to a plan, I've got confidence we'll get there. So, all right. And as I've learned, I saw fingers come up. Mayor Hona. Say, as I checked, I don't need a motion to adjourn, so RTA meeting adjourned.
I never asked it.
We don't ask.